Hey everyone, our story begins with the caravan estate already burning, weapons line its halls, so a battle has reached Arhan's home. Young Arhan stares into the fire, already frightened by what surrounds him. A blade catches the flames, an early sign that this disaster is being caused by swordsmen. The boy's narrowed eyes harden as the memory turns to the life he had before the attack. Arhan grew up hearing that he was the heir of House Caravan. His mother points him toward the family's old sword and its inherited duty. She describes their ancestors as knights praised as lords of war. Arhan listens with the innocent confidence of a child raised inside that legend. But the family now lives far from the capital, in a modest village beneath the old caravan name. For Arhan, those grand stories feel distant beside the wheat fields around his home. He works the harvest himself, instead of acting like a sheltered noble heir. His hand gathers the stalks, making that ordinary labor part of his daily life. The villagers work around him, not below him. They joke with Arhan as they work, treating their young master like one of their own. He begins to question whether all the heroic tales about Caravan were ever true. That doubt does not make him bitter, he simply values the people in front of him more. The farmers call him over for the midday meal. Even the children tug at him and complain when he steals their food. Arhan laughs at their teasing. This village is family to him. Then a drop of blood lands on the wheat, interrupting his warm memories. At sunset, the villagers are still talking about a little girl's coming birthday. Arhan offers to bring fruit for the celebration. An older villager tells him the youngest daughter is due for her birthday soon. Arhan proudly says he will become the next lord of Caravan. The adults say they have been blessed with a master like him, while quietly worrying about his future. A sword slash suddenly cuts through a villager. The celebration ends before it begins. Blood sprays across her face as she realizes she has been struck. The field is stained red in the last light of day. A sword-bearing figure walks toward the village out of the darkness. The villagers see him and freeze in fear. The intruder calls the place Caravan. He has come for the house, not for loot. His blade flashes through the crowd as the massacre begins in earnest. He says Caravan must be erased from existence, while cutting another victim down. The birthday apples tumble onto the ground and lie abandoned. Arhan arrives among bodies and cannot understand what has happened to his village. The remaining villagers run through the ruined street, desperate to escape the unseen swordmaster. The blade extinguishes half the village in a matter of minutes. By nightfall, Arhan's father covers the child's eyes and holds him through the horror. Behind them, the caravan estate burns, reduced to the target of a single swordmaster. The night hangs over the caravan estate after the village massacre. Arhan's mother runs to him through the ruined house. She pulls her son into her arms before she can ask what happened. Her hand trembles as she holds him close. For one moment, Arhan mistakes that warmth for safety. Then he sees her kneeling in blood behind him. The tragedy is still happening. The ruined room and red-lit window show how far the attack has already spread. Outside, survivors are leaving the village one by one. Arhan finds his father alone among the books of the estate. The Lord of Caravan beats his fist against himself, crushed by failing to protect anyone. He falls to the floor but still swears he will not surrender. Arhan's mother arrives with a practical answer. A carriage is ready. She tells Arhan they must leave this land and go as far away as possible. Arhan refuses to go without both of his parents. His mother knows his father will stay to face the enemy as lord of this land. She chooses to stay at her husband's side until the end as well. She kneels and promises her son she loves him even in their final moments together. Arhan's father suddenly strikes the wall, forcing himself back into the fight. Blood runs down his face, but he still refuses to let despair decide for him. He and his wife embrace, accepting that they will face death together. The retainer waits with a carriage at the edge of the forest road. He tells Arhan that a regular person cannot fight a calamity like the intruder. Arhan grips a weapon. Accepting the tragedy is not the same as abandoning his parents. The retainer wishes Lord and Lady Caravan could have escaped with him. But Arhan breaks free and runs back toward the estate. He knows running away would mean leaving his parents behind. His plan is desperate, a single poisoned arrow through the swordmaster's heart. He has spent a month obtaining poison for exactly this chance. Back at Caravan, the white-haired attacker sits calmly over a fallen body. Arhan steps out and confronts the man who has chosen death for his house. Arhan screams and fires, determined to kill him. The swordmaster cuts the arrow from the air before it can touch him. Arhan is thrown down at the swordsman's feet, utterly powerless. The attacker sees that Arhan is 18, old enough to understand the threat in front of him. Arhan reaches his wounded mother, trying to protect her with his body. The white-haired swordmaster is Carlos, master of the 10 swords, who massacred half of Caravan in a blink. Carlos spares the parents for now and says he will return in 1 month. His order is simple: leave this land with everyone here if they want to live. Arhan begs his mother to come with him as she grips his shoulders. She makes him promise to go on living, even if that means forgetting revenge. The carriage is ready. She leaves Arhan in the retainer's care before Carlos returns. The retainer drags the screaming boy away from his mother. His mother stays behind, growing smaller as Arhan reaches helplessly for her. A blue presence begins to answer the abandoned heir, hinting that Caravan's old legends are not finished with him. A year after the massacre, moonlight settles over the silent Caravan estate. Arhan's research identifies Carlos as the kingdom's strongest swordsman and guardian of peace. Alone at his desk, Arhan searches records for secrets his lineage might hold. A sudden light crosses the room, while Arhan remains absorbed in his search. Blue radiance flashes beside the door, breaking the stillness of the abandoned house. Arhan whirls toward the disturbance, stunned by the shape forming behind him. Spectral energy gathers into an elderly swordsman where nobody had stood moments earlier. The apparition addresses Arhan with the dignity expected of a Caravan descendant. The old man's translucent body and blue aura prove he is no living visitor. Arhan faces the vivid spirit, unable to dismiss him as a simple hallucination. The spectral elder steps closer, grounding the impossible encounter inside Arhan's room. Arhan studies the visitor's face, wary that grief may be deceiving him. The elder lets his full spectral form appear before the kneeling young heir. Arhan demands the stranger's identity, instead of accepting the vision without question. The spirit towers over him and answers with the authority of an ancestor. He names himself Liam Caravan, House Caravan's founder and greatest swordmaster. Liam confirms that the frightened boy before him is his noble descendant. Arhan's patience snaps, and he demands to know why Liam has appeared. Revenge burns across Arhan's face more strongly than fear of the ghost. Liam remains composed while measuring the hatred consuming his young descendant. He explains that Arhan's desperate longing reached far enough to summon him. Images of Carlos and the massacre reveal the target fixed inside Arhan's mind. Liam recognizes that hatred has carried Arhan toward the answer he desires. The memory of Carlos makes the gulf between Arhan and a swordmaster unmistakable. Liam states the hard rule: defeating one swordmaster requires another swordmaster. He asks whether Arhan truly intends to avenge everyone he loved. Arhan's answer leaves no doubt that revenge remains his only chosen purpose. Liam turns that resolve toward the forbidden power hidden in Caravan blood. Arhan listens, as the impossible distance between himself and Carlos finally narrows. The promise of a path shocks Arhan after a year without any hope. Liam explains that Caravan heirs can make a sword's strength their own. That inherited art is sword devouring, a path reserved for the bloodline's heir. A gleaming blade becomes the first physical proof of Liam's extraordinary claim. Liam brings Arhan among the old weapons preserved within the ruined estate. Steel glows in the fire as Liam begins demonstrating the Caravan method. The forge room surrounds Arhan with heat, blades, and the weight of ancestry. Arhan watches the heated weapon, uncertain how flesh could possibly consume steel. Liam insists that Caravan blood can inherit what ordinary descendants never receive. When Arhan still hesitates, Liam repeats the command without softening it. Arhan raises the heated blade toward his mouth and prepares to devour it. He chooses the pain, because even a sliver of hope is worth enduring. Fire and energy erupt around Arhan the instant the devouring begins. The awakening snaps Arhan backward, as power tears through his unprepared body. His body twists above the cracked floor while the absorbed force surges onward. Arhan keeps biting through the blade despite every violent shock running through him. Blood and light frame his face as he refuses to release the sword. Morning returns to the Caravan house after Arhan's first brutal devouring attempt. Arhan jolts awake, gasping from the pain that overwhelmed him at the forge. Sweat and ragged breaths show how completely the treasured sword defeated his body. Liam confirms that Arhan failed to absorb the weapon placed before him. The verdict lands hard because Arhan expected revenge to begin with immediate power. Liam explains that the boy's frail body cannot contain such a powerful sword. Arhan bows before his spectral forefather and accepts instruction instead of surrendering. Liam smiles at the determination surviving underneath his descendants' exhaustion. Master and heir remain together inside the cold, nearly empty Caravan room. Liam warns that reaching swordmaster level has destroyed many stronger candidates. Even so, he reveals that he prepared a specific shortcut for Arhan. Arhan looks up, startled that another route might still remain open. Liam's original plan was simple: Arhan would devour his treasured sword. That single absorption was meant to elevate Arhan directly to swordmaster level. Instead, Liam admits the treasured blade remains far beyond Arhan's current capacity. Arhan acknowledges his body's inadequacy without allowing disappointment to end his pursuit. Outside, the devastation of Caravan makes the slower road feel especially cruel. Liam offers another path for a descendant clever enough to survive it. The ruined grounds still hold debris, abandoned rooms, and weapons left after slaughter. Arhan crosses the scarred estate where his family's former life has vanished. Liam leads him to piles of worthless scrap metal and discarded swords. Arhan steps among the broken weapons that scavengers would have ignored. Each lesser blade offers a smaller portion of strength his body can endure. Arhan accepts that he must devour as many weak swords as possible. He begins the slower work of eating steel simply to become strong enough. Liam makes survival, not technique, the first requirement of Arhan's training. Night falls over Caravan while that relentless conditioning continues unseen inside. 1 month later, armed strangers enter the estate and find no obvious residence. The intruders lounge inside, congratulating themselves on finding shelter and stored weapons. One man pauses when a small sound suggests the abandoned house is occupied. Another loudly calls for the unknown resident to reveal himself. They pull out a woman's dress, treating Caravan possessions like scavenged prizes. A bandit sniffs the garment and jokes that no woman has lived there recently. Their crude amusement ends when a quiet presence answers from the shadows. Young Arhan steps forward, his face hidden while the trespassers turn toward him. He orders them to put the stolen property down and speak instead. The men demand whether Arhan intends to fight them over the ruined house. A larger intruder mocks the child's warning and advances without concern. Heavy steps close the distance while Arhan remains still and measures him. Arhan's blue eye fixes on the attacker without the panic of a month earlier. The brute charges, promising to crush the boy for challenging their group. Arhan's gaze sharpens as devoured strength gathers for its first living test. He slips inside the attack and drives his narrow blade into the opening. The first counter lands cleanly, shocking every outlaw who dismissed him as helpless. At the forge, Liam presents a needle-thin sword instead of another heavy blade. He warns that swinging this delicate weapon like a cutter would break it. Its narrow construction serves one purpose, concentrating force into a precise point. Liam demonstrates the line of a thrust rather than the arc of a slash. Arhan realizes the unfamiliar sword was designed to pierce, not cut. The lesson deepens when Liam begins describing the blade's former owner. That owner possessed a delicate body yet killed more than 200 enemies. A red-haired woman appears inside the sword's memory, her needle held behind her. The blade's strength came from a life made more resolute through suffering. Fire destroyed the girl's home and left scorched ground where her family belonged. She survived the flames with red hair, bandages, and a permanent facial scar. After losing everything, the orphaned girl was taken away from the ruins. Her new life began inside an orphanage crowded with strangers and judgment. She stood alone at its doorway, already marked as different before speaking. Bandages could cover burned skin, but they could not hide her isolation. Other children whispered that her scar proved she had been cursed. Their taunts followed her through the orphanage while adults failed to intervene. Humiliation hardened into desperation as the girl silently wished for death. Eventually, she approached a stern, wandering knight and asked him for instruction. With her scar exposed, she promised to do whatever survival required. The knight Hegel warned that a sword alone would only injure her. She insisted anyway, forcing Hegel to test whether resolve matched her request. Hegel dropped a barrel of weapons before her and told her to choose. He offered one attempt to prove she could use whichever weapon she selected. The girl studied the assortment and fixed upon the thinnest blade. Her hand moved past heavier swords and reached directly for the needle. She lifted the narrow weapon that suited precision instead of physical strength. Rather than swing, she drove its point straight through Hegel's target. Hegel's surprise showed that the scarred child understood the weapon immediately. The memory reveals her first strike becoming the foundation of later killing skill. Back in the present, Liam makes Arhan run until his body can endure. He admits he taught no swordsmanship, focusing entirely on physical conditioning. Arhan's precise first stab proves his body has properly absorbed the needle. With the narrow sword in hand, Arhan begins his first step as Caravan's heir. The inherited memory returns beneath moonlit trees, carrying the girl's lingering pain. She practiced alone to escape the fire's memory and her tormentor's contempt. The scarred girl searched for endurance because the sword became her only solace. Night after night, she swung the blade until her crude movement grew reliable. Hegel's presence gave that desperate practice a disciplined opponent and direction. The memory finally names Hegel as a former wandering knight at the orphanage. The girl overcame her fear and approached the stern swordsman in the woods. Her learned precision manifests through Arhan, whose thrust splashes an outlaw's blood. The struck man staggers as the boy's point reaches a vital opening. The large outlaw crashes backward, dropping his weapon before the smaller fighter. Arhan looks beyond the fallen body toward the remaining armed trespassers. The survivors stare in disbelief at the child who felled their companion. The stabbed outlaw gasps on the floor, bleeding from Arhan's first strike. His thrust passed between the man's ribs and pierced one lung with precision. Arhan recognizes that borrowed experience guided an attack he never practiced himself. The needle's red current pulls his awareness back into its former owner's life. Inside the memory, Hegel taught the scarred girl far more than one thrust. Years of training turned her desperate movements into repeatable, efficient sword work. The red-haired student grew confident enough to smile beside her aging teacher. Hegel taught her to love the sword as a complete way of living. Years later, illness confined Hegel to a bed inside the orphanage. The dying teacher reached for his student's hand and offered final guidance. Hegel pants through his final lesson as illness drains the last of his strength. His grieving student holds his hand as Hegel thanks her one final time. After thanking her, Hegel lies still while she remains beside his bed. The narrow sword carried forward the grief she could no longer share with him. She left alone and faced armed men beneath the trees beyond the orphanage. Her youth and slight body made the needle valuable precisely because enemies underestimated her. A steady hand closed around the weapon before her first wandering battle. The memory names its red-haired swordswoman only by her title, the Needle Maiden. Back in the estate, Arhan flips the needle into a reverse grip. He answers the fallen outlaw's plea with one final downward stab. The finishing thrust silences the wounded man and completes Arhan's first kill. Back at Caravan, Arhan stares down at the first person he killed. He feels almost nothing, and that emotional absence frightens him more than blood. The dead outlaw lies before him while the survivors remain gathered ahead. Arhan understands the needle transferred more than technique into his young mind. He wonders why men with superior numbers still refuse to move against him. The remaining outlaws tremble because they now recognize the child as dangerous. Liam's spectral presence confirms their hesitation is fear, not strategy. Arhan confronts them as outlaws rather than travelers seeking honest shelter. A red pressure gathers around the young heir as killing intent takes hold. Arhan launches himself at the gathered outlaws before they can surround him. Arhan slips through their opening while blades and bodies crowd the ruined room. His needle darts into a vulnerable target before a broad weapon can descend. A lesson from the needle's memory surfaces in Arhan's mind and steadies his timing. He threads through multiple attackers, choosing a precise line between their weapons. Arhan drops low and pierces upward instead of contesting the enemy's strength. A thrust lands from inside the outlaw's reach, where a heavy swing cannot recover. Arhan pivots away as another desperate attack cuts through empty space. He crosses between opponents and forces their numbers to obstruct one another. A furious bandit commits to a wide swing, exposing his entire center line. The Needle Maiden's memory reveals the flexible, dancer-like posture behind the counter. Arhan folds beneath the blade and keeps his needle close to the target. He flips past the attacker, preserving momentum while changing the thrusting angle. The Needle Maiden's memory shows the same descending angle now guiding Arhan. Her remembered point drives straight through an opponent before he can defend. Another outlaw falls at Arhan's feet while a survivor watches from across the room. A surviving bandit watches his own blade tremble as courage finally collapses. To the survivor, Arhan's calm silhouette now resembles a blood-red maniac. Sir Vettel faces Liam after finally putting his doubts aside. Liam tells the young caravan that suffering now lies ahead. The spectral master makes clear that this road is not ordinary. At dawn, Liam brings Vettel to the base of a sheer cliff. The cliff rises above him like an impossible wall. Vettel starts climbing while Liam watches from the rock face. Birds circle above the height he must somehow conquer. He sees the distant ledge that marks the trial's end. Vettel strains against the stone, already short of breath. Liam coolly reminds him that weakness has followed him since childhood. While Vettel climbs, Liam begins explaining the ranks of swordsmen. Warriors who awaken mana hearts stand beyond ordinary fighters. Swordmasters are those who have awakened the power of the heart. Liam asks Vettel which stage he believes he can reach. Vettel admits that he is still only a beginner. The exhausted boy cannot understand why the training is so extreme. Liam says forming a mana heart is normally not complicated. Caravan blood, however, carries the steadfast power of steel. That extraordinary blood needs a vessel strong enough to contain it. Liam names the unique vessel Vettel must forge, the Heart of Steel. The only method is repeated peril until Vettel's body demands mana. Vettel's grip slips as the cliff punishes every tired muscle. His fingers claw for the rock instead of letting go. He drags himself toward the upper ledge with torn hands. Liam says the mana heart Vettel awakens will be uniquely his. Vettel answers with a grim smile instead of surrendering. The cliff itself crumbles beneath the pressure of his climb. Elsewhere, moonlight settles over Campbell in the eastern Verdi region. Inside a tavern, locals raise a rumor about the village west of town. They say Caravan Village has been deserted for an entire year. The story calls the abandoned land a place where mysterious danger waits. One listener quietly considers the rumor over his drink. His coughing makes the discussion feel more ominous. Back on the cliff, Vettel realizes Liam's words have proved true. The needle's former owner's memories begin surfacing more clearly inside him. The unnamed red-haired swordswoman appears in a vivid combat memory. Vettel recognizes that her determination is part of what he inherited. The needle glows amid fire as the bond to its former owner deepens. Liam refuses to lie when Vettel asks about safer methods. Vettel protests that this lesson is literally risking his life. A potion can awaken an ordinary mana heart far more easily. A swordwalker can also transfer mana to teach someone to sense it. Even sheltered nobles can awaken through those conventional methods. Still clinging to the wall, Vettel asks why Liam chose this path. A month later, Vettel hangs from the cliff with one hand. He forces his fingers to hold even as the stone tears them open. The trial continues day after day without mercy. Liam watches while Vettel's small body is driven past exhaustion. Every fall is treated as another lesson rather than an excuse to stop. Vettel keeps climbing until his muscles finally fail. He collapses on the ground, too spent to rise. Even unconscious, his body bears the marks of relentless training. When he wakes, the world around him feels sharper than before. Vettel notices details his old senses would have missed. He holds the needle and focuses on its strange influence. The former owner's instinct guides his stance toward a single precise point. An attack comes, and Vettel reads its path before it reaches him. He slips past the strike and drives the needle forward. His body moves with a dancer's economy rather than raw strength. The needle's tip finds the opening between his opponents. Vettel turns aside another attack instead of meeting force with force. He keeps his balance as the enemy's weapon sweeps past. A narrow counterattack lands exactly where it needs to. Then Vettel unleashes a rapid barrage of piercing thrusts. A storm of needle thrusts drives the mercenary backward before he can recover his footing. The needle's speed makes one precise fighter feel impossible to approach. The last attacker falls as Vettel's focus finally breaks. Afterward, he studies the blade that changed the way he fights. Vettel realizes his growth is not the cliff training alone. Absorbing the needle has refined his senses and body. He can now feel mana moving around him. That change makes him wonder what waits beyond a mana heart. Liam explains that swordwalkers wield mana for offense and defense. Against one of them, Vettel's present strength would mean nothing. The stranger in the ruined village could kill him in an instant. Liam offers no comfort about the overwhelming gap between them. Instead, he says strength rules every law in this world. Vettel is told to keep the feelings that make him hesitate. Liam says those feelings can become fuel instead of a weakness. The next lesson will demand that Vettel endure even more. Vettel accepts the warning, knowing the village trial is close. The cliff training has prepared his body but not erased his fear. He tightens his hand around the needle before moving on. The red-haired former owner's presence remains just beneath his thoughts. Vettel senses the waiting stranger's mana while Liam confirms how completely the swordwalker outclasses him. Vettel slips beneath the sweeping chain instead of meeting the mercenary's strength head-on. The next lesson begins with mana blades already flying toward Vettel as Liam orders him not to flee. At the ruined village, Vettel watches the armed stranger from cover. The man walks through abandoned homes without taking a single possession. Instead of looting, he carefully handles what the dead villagers left behind. That restraint makes Vettel question whether this man is truly an enemy. Liam warns him not to confuse a knight's appearance with good intentions. A title and a sword do not reveal what someone will do. Vettel keeps watching because he needs proof before he decides. The stranger's silence makes every movement inside the village feel dangerous. Vettel remembers that Caravan Village was destroyed and abandoned. He cannot let another outsider dishonor the people who died here. Liam presses him. Observation alone cannot uncover the man's intent. Vettel accepts that he will eventually have to confront him. The boy reaches for the narrow sword called the needle. The moment danger rises, its former owner's memories stir again. Vettel feels the red-haired swordswoman's fighting instinct answering his fear. The needle maiden once became feared for attacks no one could read. Her memory opens on mercenaries facing a lone swordswoman. She moves through them with ruthless, needle-like precision. One strike drops an attacker before he can defend himself. The surviving mercenaries realize that her burned face does not make her weak. A knight in the memory dismisses her as a nobody. The needle maiden refuses to bow to his contempt. She turns her blade toward the men trying to cage her. Her red hair and scarred face become the image Vettel carries forward. The memory proves that technique was forged through suffering, not pity. Back in the village, Vettel's body tenses around the needle. His heart beats harder as the stranger finally notices him. The boy asks himself whether this visitor is friend or foe. He steps out rather than hiding behind the empty houses. Vettel explains that this land belonged to the Caravan family. He offers the stranger peace as a neighbor, not a demand to leave. Yet his grip shows that he is prepared to fight if necessary. The older man listens without lowering his own weapon. Vettel admits he knows the other swordsman is far stronger. Still, he will not abandon the village without an answer. The stranger says he will not trust another person's honor blindly. That refusal turns a cautious meeting into a duel. Vettel senses mana in the man's body and recognizes the danger. This is not merely a veteran fighter, but a swordwalker. The gap between them is so vast that Vettel expects to die. Even so, he raises the needle and holds his ground. The stranger's sword comes up with controlled, terrifying calm. Vettel braces for the first strike that will test his resolve. The ruined village becomes the arena for a hopeless confrontation. Liam watches without intervening as his student faces the wall. Vettel's fear remains visible, but it does not make him run. The swordwalker moves first, forcing Vettel to react. The needle is all Vettel has against that overwhelming presence. He commits to the fight before the first killing blow can land. The chapter ends with the two swordsmen facing each other. The swordwalker attacks with restraint, but mana still floods his blade. Vettel sees immediately that even a casual swing can kill him. The larger sword descends before he can create any distance. He twists aside and survives by the narrowest possible margin. The strike tears through the ground where Vettel stood. Vettel cannot match that power, so he studies its trajectory. The needle becomes a tool for redirecting force rather than blocking it. He catches the larger blade at an angle and changes its line. The deflection buys him one breath instead of a victory. A second exchange hurls Vettel back across the ruined ground. He forces his legs to move before the next strike arrives. The swordwalker's calm control makes the difference in level unmistakable. Vettel slips through another opening with the needle held tight. His counterattack cannot reach the man behind the mana barrier. The impact still rattles his entire body. Pain spreads through Vettel as the clash exposes his fragile limits. His body wants to collapse under pressure. It was never built to bear. The boy sees the wall between himself and a true swordwalker. Instead of retreating, something hard begins pulsing inside his chest. The heart of steel answers the danger with a metallic beat. Vettel remembers the Needle Maiden meeting a wall she could not cross. Her defeat taught her that fear of weakness can be its own prison. In that memory, Hegel tells his student to face every wall. The Needle Maiden refuses to let a stronger enemy define her end. Vettel takes that lesson as permission to make his own path. He steadies the needle even as his opponent towers over him. The boy attacks again, choosing motion over helplessness. Each thrust is turned away by the swordwalker's impossible defense. Yet Vettel keeps looking for the one place the wall can break. He places all of his trust in the technique inside the needle. The former owner's resolve pushes him forward through the pain. Vettel changes targets and drives for the stranger's sword wrist. The sudden attack forces the older man to acknowledge his intent. Vettel redirects the counter instead of trying to overpower it. Mana begins to swirl around him without conscious control. The needle follows the current as if the air itself has opened. For one moment, Vettel's small attack becomes a real threat. His opponent shifts his hand to protect the vulnerable wrist. Vettel presses the opening before it can disappear. The move is reckless, but it is the only path he can see. The swordwalker recognizes that something unusual is awakening in Vettel. Steel-like mana hardens around the boy's heart. The pressure that once crushed him now feeds the new vessel. Vettel's heart of steel is finally forming under battle stress. The knight sees that this mana heart is far harder than normal. He realizes the Caravan bloodline has produced something rare. Vettel's aura flickers as he struggles to control the awakening. The needle points forward through the surrounding mana. The swordwalker raises his weapon for one decisive final strike. Vettel refuses to look away from the wall in front of him. Both fighters prepare as the newly formed Heart of Steel beats. The next collision will decide whether Vettel's path can continue. The ruined village shakes beneath the pressure of their mana. Vettel steps forward with his needle aimed at the opening. The swordwalker answers with a blow meant to end the exchange. The swordwalker's ultimate pressure becomes a wall begging Vettel to flee. His instincts scream that one more step could mean death. Vettel remembers why he came here and plants his feet instead. The immense blade closes off every ordinary route around it. Even Liam's training cannot erase the terror of this moment. Vettel chooses to advance because retreat would leave nothing behind. The impact cracks his guard and threatens to break his body. Still, he sees one narrow opening and the overwhelming attack. That single gap is enough for him to risk everything. Vettel gathers the mana from his new heart into the needle. The narrow blade carries all of his focus toward one point. The swordwalker watches the reckless charge with surprise. He recognizes the stubborn refusal to yield as a caravan trait. Vettel launches himself straight at the wall of force. The needle's path is too small to overpower the wall head-on. Then the former owner's final memory pulls Vettel deeper inside the sword. The Needle Maiden remembers the tragedy that once made her fear fire. She realizes the worst prison was fear of her own weakness. Her red-haired figure faces the world she once believed she could not survive. Hegel's teaching remains with her, never retreat from the wall ahead. That lesson becomes the strength she leaves inside the needle. In the present, Vettel's blue mana and her fiery resolve overlap. The two battles become one refusal to abandon the path forward. Vettel's thrust meets the Swordwalker's defense at last. The clash sends fire-colored force across the battlefield. He keeps pushing the needle toward the opening he found. The remembered swordswoman lends every fragment of her determination. The strike carries more than technique, it carries her choice to live. In her last thoughts, the Needle Maiden turns back to Hegel. She remembers the mentor who gave her the needle and taught her courage. After leaving the orphanage, she learned to face the world on her own. Each stronger enemy became another wall she refused to run from. Her memories show the long path from fear to resolve. The world tried to consume her, but she would not surrender again. Even death and fire no longer controlled her choices. She faces an armored opponent with the same resolve Vettel now carries. The memory reaches its emotional end as her blade burns bright. Her final strength passes to Vettel through the needle. The old sword has given him everything its former owner can leave. The red-haired swordswoman appears in tears as the memory fades. Her story ends not in defeat, but in the resolve she passed on. The physical needle begins to burn away in Vettel's hand. Flame consumes the blade as its power is completely devoured. The burning needle hangs in darkness as its strength and final memory finish passing into Vettel. Vettel wakes beside a small fire after the desperate duel. Still dazed beside the fire, Vettel realizes the duel left him unconscious on the ruined ground. The stranger's robe covers him instead of leaving him in the cold. That unexpected kindness forces Vettel to reconsider the man he fought. The older knight calls their duel worthy of the caravan name. He praises Vettel for forcing strength out of a hopeless situation. Vettel studies the stranger as a battle-hardened veteran rather than an enemy. Years of wilderness fighting are visible in the man's worn presence. The older swordsman speaks with the calm of someone used to death. When Vettel asks why he entered this forgotten village, the answer changes everything. The man says he came here intending to face his end alone. A terminal illness has been consuming his body for years. Dark sickness has already spread toward his heart. He has begun repeating the same stories as the disease worsens. The knight does not want his final days to become another person's burden. Solitude was the last choice he felt he still controlled. The campfire makes his confession feel more like grief than a threat. Vettel listens instead of treating the weakness as an opening. The boy recognizes the pain of being left alone with a legacy. That understanding changes the distance between the two caravans. The older man reaches out a hand rather than a weapon. Vettel accepts the gesture and lets the duel finally end. The stranger tells him that they are neighbors now. His name is Arhan Caravan, the terminally ill older resident of this village. Sir Vettel and older Arhan seal their peace with a handshake. Inside Vettel, the newly awakened heart of steel continues to pulse. The duel has made him a novice, though the cost was enormous. Liam says this new stage only opens the next harsher lesson. A few days later, Vettel prepares to leave the ruined settlement. Older Arhan remains behind to safeguard the manor and its memories. Liam explains that caravan blood improves through extreme hardship. Ordinary practice cannot provide the pressure Vettel now needs. His spectral master wants him to absorb another sword. That search requires many styles, dangerous fighters, and public stakes. Vettel travels with Liam toward the place chosen for this trial. The distant destination promises the kind of conflict Liam demanded. Vettel understands that a new sword will have to be earned. The road leads toward a city built around violent combat. A roar of steel reveals fighters clashing before a crowd. The scale of the arena makes Vettel's next challenge feel immediate. Its contestants test weapons and lives in front of spectators. Liam has brought his newly awakened student to the Colosseum. Vettel's next path begins where countless blades are waiting. Firma, the city of steel, looks prosperous around its enormous arena, where smiths, travelers, and spectators keep the streets busy. The arena dominates the cityscape, making it clear why so many people come here to watch combat. Sir Vettel and his spectral master Liam Caravan approach the old arena together. Liam studies the building and says the arena has changed during the long time since he knew it. The crowd's roar still stirs his nostalgia, because the passion around the stadium is exactly what he remembers. Liam's memory of the old gladiators is violent, bloody, and uncompromising. In Liam's day, warriors from different races fought brutally for supremacy inside this place. The remembered clashes show why victory once meant taking everything from the defeated. Vettel sees why the old gladiator system appeals to his own ambition to become stronger. He says defeating gladiators could also give him weapons to eat, not only experience. Liam immediately corrects him. Consuming every weapon he finds would be a simple-minded shortcut. The master recalls the ruined weapons left behind by unworthy swordsmen, a warning against indiscriminate feeding. Vettel takes the warning seriously and fixes his eye on a more deliberate path forward. With that lesson in mind, master and student head for Firma's formal gladiator registration. Hours later, the arena district is even busier as Vettel reaches the registration queue. When the clerk asks his name, Sir Vettel uses Arhan. Borrowed from the older living Arhan caravan he recently left behind. The clerk explains that no one can enter an arena duel without first receiving a medal. Vettel repeats the unfamiliar word, checking what the registration rule actually requires. Vettel and Liam react awkwardly to the unfamiliar system, but they stay in line and listen. The clerk's answer leaves the pair visibly confused by Firma's bureaucracy. The registrar produces the required medal, while Vettel realizes this new arena has rules the old one never needed. She hands over a bronze medal, placing the newcomer at the bottom of Firma's ranked divisions. Vettel turns the bronze token in his hand and gives it a dry, unimpressed look. He notes that much has changed since Liam's era, even though the arena still revolves around fighting. Liam's old memories make the contrast with the modern arena especially stark. Vettel reasons that hosting fights to the death for centuries would eventually leave an arena with no fighters. The city instead needs uncertainty, because gamblers lose interest when every outcome is obvious. A crowd gathers around the match listings, showing how Firma markets evenly matched duels as entertainment. The packed Coliseum is the proof. Successful competitive fights made the city flourish. Liam says this is still useful for Vettel, since opponents near his level can teach him more than easy victories. They enter the Hall of Fame, where champion weapons gleam in separate illuminated displays. Tom, the hall's keeper, introduces himself while Vettel studies the weapons behind the glass. Tom presents swords carried by former champions, and Liam asks directly whether those displayed weapons can be claimed. Tom calls the request audacious, while Liam smiles as though the Hall of Fame has just become Vettel's next target. The next day, Vettel returns to the arena entrance, now focused on turning his bronze medal into a real opportunity. He walks through the gladiators' corridor alone, leaving the public streets behind for the combat side of Firma. Tom confirms that the Hall of Fame weapons can be earned, but only by gladiators who prove their worth. The prize is limited to a weapon comparable to the fighter's medal, so bronze status cannot reach a silver sword. Vettel looks over the displayed blades as Tom explains the restriction rather than offering a shortcut. A silver-level weapon is therefore beyond Vettel's current reach, giving him a concrete reason to climb the rankings. Tom's rule leaves no loophole. Vettel must earn his way upward. Master Liam quietly tells Vettel that Tom is not an ordinary caretaker, despite the man's humble job. Vettel notices the master's serious reaction and starts viewing Tom differently. Liam suspects a swordsman with unusual quirks would not be standing guard here without a reason. For now, he abandons the idea of looting the hall and tells Vettel to build strength through fights instead. The mentor approves of an arena where Vettel can face opponents as equals without exposing his full identity. Concealing his face will let Vettel build an arena reputation safely. A hooded arena official approaches Vettel and asks what name he will use inside the ring. The official explains that masked gladiators do not reveal their real names to the crowd. That separation lets a fighter preserve status outside the arena while still taking part in dangerous duels. Vettel pauses over the choice, because this combat name will be the one spectators remember. He thinks of the spectral swordsman who has guided him since the beginning. Vettel chooses Liam, honoring Master Liam Caravan. It is his public gladiator identity, entirely separate from borrowed Arhan. He pulls on the arena mask, committing to the name before stepping onto the bronze floor. Inside, the bronze arena is almost empty, a reminder that casual gamblers do not respect the lowest division. One spectator openly dismisses bronze gladiators as the weakest fighters in the whole system. Vettel nevertheless crosses the arena, treating the quiet crowd as part of the test, rather than a reason to hesitate. His mask hides his expression, but his eye remains fixed on the ring. Master Liam watches from above and says a hostile atmosphere can forge the mindset Vettel needs. Vettel accepts the pressure, while his master treats contempt as useful training. The mentor warns his student to remember that every step into the arena carries the honor of his chosen name. Masked Vettel answers that he understands, his blue eye fixed forward beneath the mask. The announcer then brings out a huge armored gladiator, making the mismatch obvious at a glance. The crowd is told this is rookie Liam's first duel, with no record and no reputation behind him. Vettel stands in the ring as the announcer formally presents the name Liam to the arena. His opponent is introduced as a bronze fighter with 3 consecutive victories and a much larger frame. The hulking gladiator points his sword at Vettel and starts mocking the tiny masked rookie. Vettel's eye narrows when the man threatens to crush his throat and break his limbs. Both fighters square off as the opponent assumes the arena's no-killing custom will protect him. When the bully insults Liam as a pathetic dead father's name, Vettel brings his blade up and demands an apology. The duel resumes with the crowd still expecting the armored veteran to prevail. The armored gladiator freezes at Vettel's sudden demand, bloodied and shocked that the timid rookie he bullied has become a cold, precise threat. Vettel repeats that he wants an apology, showing that the earlier fear was never the whole story. The larger fighter finally understands that his opponent has been baiting him into wasting strength. He charges with his heavy blade, expecting size and force to end the duel in one exchange. The huge sword descends, but Vettel has already read the path of the strike. Vettel slips past the downward swing at the last moment instead of meeting power with power. The giant turns and attacks again, but Vettel keeps his distance and refuses to trade blows. Vettel's footwork makes each aggressive rush cost the armored man more energy. Another slash misses as Vettel darts beside the armored body, forcing the bigger man to keep chasing. The veteran's frustration grows because every committed attack finds empty space. The spectators begin to see that the supposedly frightened rookie is controlling the pace of the match. Repeated misses leave the bronze veteran kneeling on the arena floor beside his sword. Vettel stays upright and composed while the exhausted opponent struggles to recover. The contrast between their breathing shows exactly whose plan has worked. He approaches slowly, making the defeated man confront how completely his strength has been drained. The crowd waits for a finishing blow, but Vettel gives the man one more chance to apologize. The helmeted gladiator finally looks frightened and submits to the boy he had dismissed. Vettel accepts the surrender, proving that the fight was won by timing and restraint rather than raw force. The audience erupts. Liam dominated a proven bronze gladiator through timing, not the wild power spectators expected to decide the match. Firma announces Liam's victory, and the masked name suddenly has a result people can gamble on. Even the onlookers who mocked the rookie begin recalculating what he might be worth in later bouts. The arena's betting attention shifts toward Vettel because his first victory overturned the expected outcome. A few days later, the registrar greets him with a new offer at the desk. She explains that a silver promotion duel is available, a chance to advance beyond bronze if he survives the test. Before the plan can proceed, the defeated gladiator storms back into the arena to ruin Vettel's opportunity. The angry fighter charges again, abandoning the discipline he was supposed to show after surrendering. Vettel turns away from the rush and lets the attacker overcommit for a second time. The failed ambush confirms that the man is acting from humiliation, not any legitimate arena grievance. Vettel catches him at close range before the charge can reach anyone else. The blade flashes down, stopping the attack with a precise strike instead of a prolonged brawl. Vettel pins the man's hand to the floor, leaving the would-be saboteur unable to swing again. Holding the injured fighter in place, Vettel warns him to think carefully before making his next move. The arena office makes the promotion feel official, not like a casual wager. Master Liam stands behind him as the registrar prepares the terms of a silver promotion challenge. Vettel listens closely, knowing this rule will decide whether he can advance. The registrar makes clear that promotion is not another ordinary bronze match. 3 raised fingers reduce the challenge to a brutally simple condition. To earn silver, Vettel must survive for 3 minutes against an opponent selected by the arena itself. The notice makes the promotion sound prestigious, but its public format also gives the arena room to embarrass challengers. With 3 controlled wins behind him, Vettel stands beside Master Liam as the silver promotion terms sink in. Vettel studies the offer without asking the organizers to make it easier. Vettel looks at the posted offer and accepts whoever Firma chooses to send against him. His decision turns the promotion into a commitment rather than a cautious request for favorable odds. Master Liam explains the danger. The arena often picks fighters capable of leaving challengers permanently injured. The warning gives Vettel a realistic picture of what failure could cost. Vettel listens without retreating, knowing that the survival condition is designed to be cruel. At night he considers the risk alone, the blue light at his chest recalling the strength he must rely on. He believes his mana heart of steel and accumulated experience may let him endure 3 minutes. A dark-haired woman in a cloak appears nearby and watches him with a knowing, unsettling expression. She calls herself the Midnight Bride, immediately turning a private walk into a confrontation. The woman recognizes Vettel and the needle-like weapon he used in the arena. Her attention shows that Liam's quick rise has reached opponents well above the bronze tier. Midnight Bride steps close to Vettel, calm enough to make the threat feel deliberate rather than impulsive. She proposes a fight with a price attached, implying that a promotion match against her will cost more than pain. Then she walks away through the Sunset Street, leaving Vettel with the warning instead of an explanation. Vettel does not dismiss the encounter, because the stranger's confidence confirms the gulf he may be facing. That night, he bows to Tome and asks the Hall of Fame keeper for help before the silver duel. The request is not for comfort. Vettel needs a stronger sword quickly enough to change his odds. He makes the request before the match begins because waiting for the arena's chosen opponent would leave him no time to prepare responsibly. The promotion notice identifies Midnight Bride as an academy-trained swordwalker with an exceptional reputation. Her undefeated silver record explains why the arena chose her for this test rather than a merely difficult, predictable challenger. Outside the hall, Master Liam weighs the challenge as Vettel accepts he cannot yet reach Midnight Bride's level, much less defeat her cleanly. Midnight Bride faces Vettel in the fading light, still insisting that he will pay a price if he fights her. Vettel keeps his answer measured, but he refuses to treat her warning as a reason to withdraw. Master Liam speaks seriously beside him, recognizing that this opponent possesses extraordinary talent. Vettel hears the warning before making any promise about how he will fight. The mentor explains that Midnight Bride has no ordinary ceiling, while Vettel cannot even reach her present stage. Her threat is credible, precisely because the difference in skill is so large. Liam's concern is practical. Surviving a 3-minute promotion against someone this strong is not a fair contest. Vettel remains quiet instead of denying the obvious gap between them. Vettel absorbs the warning rather than arguing, because he already knows the difference between them. He clasps his hands and decides that time is too short to surrender the chance for a stronger sword. The decision comes from urgency, not from believing Midnight Bride is weak. His resolve is not bravado. Advancing now is tied to the larger plan he cannot afford to delay. With that settled, Vettel turns his attention back to the Hall of Fame. Vettel returns to the Hall of Fame at night and addresses Tom from below the weapon displays. He asks for a sword, despite knowing that granting one before he earns the proper medal breaks the rules. Tom hears the request without pretending it is normal, while Vettel chooses humility over demanding special treatment. Vettel says he does not want to complain like a child when the rule is standing in his way. Instead, he asks Tom to judge whether he has shown the spirit expected of a gladiator. Tom weighs the request in silence, watching the boy who keeps asking for a chance rather than an excuse. Vettel waits with his back turned, leaving the decision entirely to the keeper. The Hall of Fame's long weapon wall emphasizes what Tom could give him and what the rules normally withhold. Tom reaches forward and grants the request, deciding that Vettel has earned an exception. The keeper selects a small dagger instead of a grand sword, but its value lies in what Vettel's ability can absorb. Purple energy coils around the dagger as Vettel consumes it, immediately strengthening his sword-eating path. The next day, Midnight Bride waits in an arena room with her long weapon still calm before the coming match. Arena organizers approach her with an offer designed to turn the promotion duel into a spectacle. They promise the Dragon Blade of the Far East if she humiliates the novice gladiator Liam. Midnight Bride considers the reward, understanding that the arena wants more than a simple silver rank victory. Veiled and armed, she finally enters the blue-lit arena for Vettel's 3-minute promotion match. The crowd receives her arrival as the silver-ranked opponent whose presence alone changes the atmosphere. A strange red pressure makes Midnight Bride shudder and search the arena, but its source remains unconfirmed. Vettel's shadowed face and fixed blue eye end the chapter on resolve, not a resolved answer about that pressure. Alright everyone, that's it for today. See you next time. Hey everyone. Our story begins with Crowd was once remembered as a paradise, its towers glowing above a land people believed could stay beautiful. Then outsiders looked back and gave that beautiful past a name, Paradise. The present-day city is the opposite. Freedom and hope have vanished behind its cold streets. Families survive beneath that shadow while the powerful decide what their lives are worth. Even the people who understand the cruelty have to keep moving through it. Crowd has become nothing more than a terrible land, beautiful only in old memory. The shadow began when the nobles' corruption turned authority into a private appetite. They drank and celebrated while ordinary citizens carried the cost of their luxury. Their greed had no bottom. Every new pleasure only demanded a larger sacrifice. Blinded by that hunger, the nobles sold the city's territory to the Golden Empire. They even pledged citizens human rights as collateral for more money. Red banks supplied massive loans, and Crowd's people became the security behind them. The price was the loss of dignity, rights, and any protection from the powerful. A child growing up inside that system could see the chain long before understanding its name. For one young survivor, the question was no longer whether Crowd was cruel, but why it had to stay that way. His father was beaten to death while begging tourists for food. His mother sold her body so her children would not starve. His family kept walking, carrying shame that belonged to the city, not to them. His sister died of fever because the family lacked only a few copper coins. Her small hand became the memory that the boy could never put down. Every quiet room and every helpless body sharpened the same question inside him. Then he found an answer in an unexpected place, the city's public executions. Crowd's guillotine stood as a warning taller than any law. At the execution ground, crowds gathered to watch punishment become public theater. The condemned man's charge was assault, but the context made the judgment feel grotesquely one-sided. A drunken tourist had tormented a citizen, confident nobody would make him answer for it. The citizen chose to resist, and that single act was treated as a crime against the city's order. In Crowd, bloodshed was trivial when it protected foreign comfort, but dangerous when an outsider was touched. An outsider becoming the victim was unprecedented, so the city rushed to restore the old hierarchy. Violence came down fast, turning one act of resistance into an example for everyone watching. Crowd carried out the execution to appease the powers it feared. The punishment was unreasonable, and the violence was unmatched in its unfairness. Neighbors who might once have shown sympathy learned to fear the same fate. The next day, the streets looked peaceful because the screams had taught everyone silence. On crowded streets, there were no screams, only the appearance of ordinary life. Day after day, the unfamiliar silence continued. Residents moved through bright streets while an invisible memory pressed down on them. The quiet could not erase the old wounds, it only pushed them deeper into the city. Freedom, however, would come with a price, and someone would have to spill blood. One person decided to become that someone willingly. That decision leads into the sacred duel dedicated to Goddess Lepre, Midnight Bride versus the Little Gladiator. The arena opens and Sir Vettel enters under the public gladiator identity Liam. Midnight Bride studies him. The mercenary impression she first saw is beginning to change. Her first attack tears through the air before the crowd can understand what they are seeing. But the little gladiator is already moving differently, slipping past the strike. Midnight Bride's shock is immediate. The reactions she expected should have made this dodge impossible. Sir Vettel answers with a rhythm that does not belong to the beginner she measured. Steel crashes together, and the duel becomes a contest between her certainty and his borrowed experience. Master Liam's discipline surfaces through Vettel's hands, changing not only his attacks, but also his breathing. Midnight Bride sees the fighter vanish into another pattern and asks who he really is. The question hangs over the shattered arena, with the identity behind Liam still unrevealed. The clash resumes before Midnight Bride can settle her footing. Her blade meets the gladiator's guard, but Sir Vettel refuses to give her a clean line. The impact throws sparks across the arena as both fighters keep their balance. Vettel's stance breaks, reforms and attacks from an angle she did not expect. Midnight Bride realizes it feels like fighting an assassin and a mercenary at the same time. His feet never stay planted long enough for her to read the next exchange. Every stance shift hides the intention of the next strike. He turns uncertainty into a weapon, forcing her to react before she can build a pattern. The unpredictability is not panic, it is deliberate pressure. That pressure makes even a simple approach dangerous. Vettel passed the beginner's level long ago, but talent alone cannot close this gap. He surges forward, and Midnight Bride answers with a counter that carries real weight. Her eyes stay calm, while his body absorbs the danger of every exchange. One clean cut from her would end the promotion attempt. Vettel catches the opening in her expression, then realizes it is bait. Her sword returns before his thought can become a strike. She almost sounds amused. She hopes he has more cards left to play. The crowd cannot believe a bronze is standing against the undefeated silver swordwalker. Some spectators think the little gladiator might actually win. Others remember exactly who his opponent is. The debate only makes the arena louder as the duel keeps accelerating. In the memory, Master Liam explains that their beloved swords share a common trait. Both blades were forged to face enemies stronger than their owners. That is why they are swords of struggle, weapons made for people who cannot rely on easy victory. Vettel lowers himself and lets the dagger's inherited experience press against his own. Blue breath gathers in the darkness as the heart of steel steadies his thoughts. The memory stops being noise and becomes a usable rhythm. Vettel inhales again, choosing control over the fear of being consumed. His eye clears, and the borrowed movements begin to align with his intent. Master Liam notices the change, but says the true trial is only beginning. Midnight Bride has already grasped his capabilities from their brief opening clash. Vettel shifts toward the distance that gives him the best chance to survive. Vettel's body begins to fail, but his eyes remain fixed on the next path. His footwork turns the arena floor into a map of exits and attacks. He keeps moving, not to win an exchange, but to buy time. The 3-minute limit is now a card in Vettel's favor. He uses that card to retreat, reset, and make her chase the engagement. Midnight Bride closes anyway, crossing the gap with frightening speed. Vettel's shock shows how little warning her advance gives him. She is already in range before he can finish the next calculation. The collision sends both blades flashing through the arena light. An observer explains the true power of a swordwalker to the young master. They project a path that suppresses an opponent's options. That path becomes a complete domain of offense and defense around the swordwalker. Midnight Bride is not merely fast. Her body and sword now operate as one system. Her power and speed are incomparable to the beginning of the match. Ordinary swordsmanship must reset between attacks, leaving a gap. Vettel searches for that gap in every movement she makes. But the next strike follows before the previous one seems finished. Her sword does not stop, it only changes direction. Each transition denies him the opening that a normal stance would create. Even the moment her weapon appears still is already another attack. She paints a world across the arena with every curved trajectory. Her strokes resemble the brushwork of a master painter. The masked swordwalker turns that beauty into relentless pressure. Vettel is forced backward through the flowing arcs, bleeding but still reading. His face tightens as another line cuts close enough to remind him how little margin remains. This is the sword of the East, elegant, delicate, and still lethal. Its trajectory is refined into one connected movement instead of separate attacks. Every curve joins the next, drawing a single beautiful line. The wave crashes down before Vettel can escape the painted path. The moment those movements stop will be the final moment to deliver the end. Vettel watches the smallest change in her posture. He waits for the instant when the flowing picture must finally resolve, but Midnight Bride's finishing motion is already descending. The arena disappears beneath the white arcs of her final attack. The exchange ends on a suspended question, not a confirmed result. Before the duel can be called a victory, the city's old darkness returns in memory. A white-haired survivor remembers moving through a city where death could rise to his chin. The threat came from corrupt bureaucrats who ruled behind respectable walls. Running became the burden he shouldered when every powerful enemy closed in. He ran through the back streets, carrying the shame of escape instead of surrender. He ran again, and the city kept stretching the distance behind him. The body keeps moving even when the mind has already reached its limit. But every escape narrows the road ahead. There will not always be a way out when you reach the end of your run. At the end waits someone he cannot face. An undeniable powerhouse steps into the memory and turns fear into a physical presence. The weapon in that figure's hand turns fear into certainty. The pursuer closes, cutting off the last open route. He knows instinctively that today his life has reached its end. Then the blade flashes, and the memory should have ended there. But inside that final instant, Vettel notices something smaller than the attack. A tiny circle appears in his awareness, a shape that does not belong to panic. For some reason, the circle feels exactly like the routes that once let him escape. The memory connects it to Crowd's twisted back alleys, the places he knows better than anyone. That familiar escape road gives Vettel's eyes a direction inside the duel. He turns toward the line instead of running from it. The escape becomes one precise movement through the attack. His body slips past the danger before the opponent can close the route. Vettel finds the narrow path between the incoming weapons. He threads the opening instead of overpowering the opponent. Vettel gives the circle a name that fits the way it saved him. The idea becomes an opening, not empty space, but a moment of escape. An opening exists only for the instant someone can see and use it. He sees it at the instant the blade should have trapped him. Then Vettel passes through before the strike can finish. The sword misses his center by the smallest possible margin. Midnight Bride's blade tears past as Vettel's new path carries him outside the fatal line. The counterstrike proves that escaping one attack does not make the opponent safe. Midnight Bride recognizes that Vettel pierced through her path and escaped in a split second. Her expression does not soften. The question is what he can do after that miracle. She asks what he will do now, while Vettel can barely keep his sword raised. Sir Vettel knows he is facing an opponent more powerful than anyone he has met. The dagger's former owner fought other Walker-class powerhouses, but Midnight Bride is different. She not only avoided a fatal wound, she counterattacked in the same instant. Vettel's ribs feel ready to break, and even creating distance now seems impossible. In this state, even the dagger's assassin arts cannot guarantee another escape. Forfeiting would be wise if the only goal were to survive the humiliation. A humiliating end could still save his life. Vettel thinks he can always try for promotion again, but the thought of surrender collapses before it can become a decision. The announcer turns the moment into spectacle, asking the audience whether they are watching history begin. The crowd senses that this is no longer a rookie's execution ceremony. Instead, the arena is watching the birth of a star. The lesson of the duel becomes a question: what makes someone a hero? A hero is someone who finds a path even in the middle of hardship. Even when the trial looks impossible, that person keeps searching for an answer. They do not merely survive, they calmly turn the answer into success. Then they engrave that achievement into history. Master Liam's voice is honest. His descendant falls short of a genius. The judgment lands while Vettel is still fighting through the storm. His body is frail, and his senses for learning martial arts are dull. While others learn 10 things, Vettel barely manages 2 or 3. That is the limit of the vessel he was born with. However, some people are praised as greater than geniuses because they refuse to give up. They may not find the perfect answer, but they stand firm and keep searching. The lesson names Arhan Caravan, a separate caravan hero held up as the model of tribulation. Even in a place where you lost everything and were left alone, the path is not finished. Even in an abyss without a single ray of light, the sword can remain in your hand. Master Liam points back to the descendant who never let go of that sword. The lesson reaches Vettel directly: my descendant. The name is not finished before the arena interrupts with another collision. A final clash detonates through the arena, scattering light and debris. Midnight Bride's eye widens as the exchange breaks the rhythm she controlled. The fighters separate for one breath, both carrying the cost of the duel. The old lesson says a hero possesses the qualities to become one, not a perfect vessel. Vettel's gaze hardens, and the next movement begins before the light fades. He drives back into motion, refusing to let a verdict about talent decide the outcome. The result is still beyond him, but the opponent's own surprise proves the path is working. Midnight Bride sees how bizarre and dancer-like his movements have become. She follows the rhythm, refusing to let the strange footwork create a second escape. A slash finally draws blood, proving that even the opening has a price. The wounded fighter bares their teeth and keeps moving through the pain. Vettel carries the cost too, but the duel has already crossed beyond an ordinary bronze match. The last image holds on the fighter's hair and the silence after the decisive exchange. Then the arena erupts. The announcer calls it Liam's victory. Firma's victory announcement is finally followed by the status change the arena promised. The little gladiator is promoted to silver. The announcer adds that he will receive the silver medal, even though the official handoff itself is not shown. The celebration does not erase the result. The injured rookie remains on the floor while the Black Bride stands above him. The woman the arena knew as Midnight Bride has proved the power gap. Organizers now see a way to turn that gap into spectacle. They give her one last chance to claim the reward attached to the match. They say that if she cuts off Vettel's arm and carries it away, the Dragon Blade of the Far East will be hers. A weapon meant to reward a victor becomes coercive leverage against a defeated rookie. The demand is not about rank or a clean result, it is about humiliating the newcomer for the crowd. Seol Yoon refuses, calling the people behind the bargain vile. She will not turn a fallen opponent into proof of somebody else's cruelty. Her refusal leaves Vettel injured but still whole, while the promised blade remains unresolved. She warns him to stay away for a while, turning the end of the match into a boundary rather than a trophy ceremony. Then Vettel loses consciousness, and the blue energy around the crossed swords refuses to fade with him. Seol Yoon wonders whether exhaustion has made her see things that are not there. The light takes shape as a white-haired bearded figure in blue robes, Liam Caravan, Vettel's spectral master. The figure is not an ordinary afterimage, it faces her and answers her sight. Liam confirms that she can see him, and the arena becomes a meeting ground between two kinds of sword experience. He explains that rare Eastern shamans were said to sense spirits, but he offers that comparison carefully, not as a final diagnosis. Seol Yoon's perception reaches beyond ordinary eyes, letting her witness the master behind the living swordsman. Liam names the state she has touched, Mind Sword, a swordmaster realm or condition tied to mastery. It is not presented as a trick Vettel deliberately cast, it is a level of sword perception she has somehow entered. The vision widens, and the first sword is joined by more blades hanging in the blue dark. Liam invokes Carlos, the famous master associated with manifesting 10 swords. Even that legend is only a comparison for what Seol Yoon is beginning to see. The number grows beyond a neat count, turning skill into a landscape instead of a single technique. Tens of swords begin to fill the space around them. The image keeps expanding, and Seol Yoon is forced to look up rather than read a single opponent's stance. The sky becomes a field of blades, each one suggesting another layer of mastery. Hundreds replace tens, and the scale moves far beyond any ordinary arena duel. At the peak of the vision, thousands of swords crowd the heavens. Liam tells her she has the potential to reach the land of the sword. He does not explain whether that name points to a realm, a spiritual state, or a legend. He keeps the larger answer out of reach, then looks toward the swordswoman whose spirit sense opened the door. For the first time, the Black Bride's real name is spoken plainly, Seol Yoon. Liam says he looks forward to meeting her again, leaving the promise personal but not romantic. After the vision, Seol Yoon's own memory supplies a second layer of meaning. She recalls an Eastern legend that a swordmaster who reaches the heavens can reunite a family with its precious predecessors. In that story, paradise is reached through sword mastery rather than inherited by birth. The sword-filled vision makes the old legend feel close enough to touch, but the encounter still does not prove that a literal sword paradise exists. It only connects Seol Yoon's inherited hope to a real experience she cannot yet explain. That uncertainty matters. The image may be a revelation, a realm, or a metaphor waiting for a later answer. What is certain is the effect. Her curiosity becomes a reason to keep following the path. The vision gives Seol Yoon a destination to pursue without settling what the destination is. Back in the recovery room, Seol Yoon gives the defeated fighter the name she wants him to use. She is not asking for a temporary truce. She wants to follow Vettel. She wants to see, hear, and feel everything beside him as the sword path unfolds. To Seol Yoon, joining Vettel on the route is a faster way to reach the pinnacle of the sword than standing alone. Vettel answers with suspicion, because the strongest person in the room is asking to join his route. He wonders whether the proposal is a deception tactic from the fighter who just defeated him. Seol Yoon's interest is not framed as a settled romance, it is tied to what she sensed through Liam. That makes her offer more useful and more dangerous, because curiosity can still become an unpredictable alliance. When Vettel turns to his master, Liam explains that Seolyun saw him during the instant Vettel lost consciousness. The spectral encounter is why she became captivated, not proof that Liam has promised her anything. Liam tells Vettel to judge the value of the swordswoman for himself. He treats her as a serious opportunity, not as a distraction from the mission. Liam also names the living boy correctly, a descendant of Caravan, carrying the borrowed identity, Arhan the Avenger. Vettel therefore keeps the identities separate in his own mind. He is Sir Vettel, while Arhan is the registration name he uses. His decision is practical. Seolyun's strength and potential may be the fastest route toward his own dream of reaching the sword's pinnacle. He welcomes her as a neighbor under the Arhan alias, and Seolyun accepts. The chapter closes on a provisional partnership, not romance. The road away from Firma turns Seolyun's arena request into a real journey, but not the romantic story Vettel first suspected. She explains that following him means traveling as a partner along the sword path she has just glimpsed. It is not a lover's declaration, and she does not ask Vettel to pretend that the arena never happened. She wants to remain close enough to see, hear, and feel everything that happens on the way to the sword's pinnacle. Vettel stays guarded, because the woman asking for partnership is also the fighter who defeated him. Her interest is still tied to the spiritual connection she witnessed, not to a promise of romance. For now, they continue together as a provisional pair whose destination matters more than either person's assumptions. Inside Caravan territory, Vettel starts counting the practical cost of that new arrangement. He examines his equipment, a damaged primary blade, spare daggers, armor, and the money he earned from the silver promotion. The blade is already a liability, and quality replacements in this region cost more than a new silver fighter can comfortably spend. The spare daggers and armor keep him moving, but they do not solve the problem of reliable long-term gear. With Seolyun beside him and no safe public identity to advertise, Vettel asks whether there is somewhere they can hide or stay. The answer leads them to a neighboring holding in Caravan territory rather than to a formal restoration of House Caravan. They arrive at a mansion that can offer shelter, information, and one more complication. The estate belongs to Sir Patel, a named knight and neighbor whose village is already in trouble. Their request for a hideout becomes a request for immediate intelligence when the surrounding village comes into view. Vettel has barely entered the new holding before the quiet visit starts to feel like a mission briefing. Shelter is no longer the only question. Patel's condition makes it clear that someone else may have to answer the threat. The travelers listen while the mansion's safe walls frame the violence waiting outside them. The village is not merely a backdrop, it is the reason Patel cannot afford to treat this visit as ordinary hospitality, and the person who must explain that danger is visibly struggling to stand through it. Patel appears bloodied, coughing, and physically weak, but he still tries to speak for the people under his protection. His illness is not a dramatic excuse for surrender, it is a tactical limit on what defense he can personally provide. He explains that uninvited guests have attacked the village. The name of the force behind it is the Red Wolf Brotherhood. Patel makes the distinction immediately. These are not ordinary bandits who can be scattered by a frightened village guard. Their arrival has turned a request for refuge into a choice between hiding and answering an organized raid. Vettel's need for equipment and shelter now points directly at the same danger he came hoping to avoid. The conversation then places the Red Wolf name beside the region's color and animal naming convention. That convention may sound like a knightly title, but the packet gives no basis for treating the Brotherhood as a legitimate order. The Red Wolf imagery makes the group memorable while keeping its individual members' names out of reach. The organization operates as raiders, not as a fair rival that Patel can challenge on formal terms. Its leader is described as skilled enough to look down on knights. That description raises the threat above a routine cleanup without giving Vettel a convenient target to identify. Patel's village therefore needs someone who can read the danger before charging into it. The report still does not reveal who commands the group or why this village was chosen. Vettel cannot treat the mission as a simple bandit hunt, even if Liam expects him to face it directly. When Liam's voice returns to the plan, he calls the coming encounter a feast prepared for the descendant. The feast is not a reward for work already finished, it is a test built around Fang. Liam orders Vettel to wipe out the arrogant attackers with that power. The order turns the Red Wolf threat into a controlled pressure test rather than an open group battle. Vettel accepts the responsibility, while Seolyun's presence creates a second question: who is supposed to fight beside him? The answer is deliberately harsh. Vettel agrees to confront the attackers alone. Seolyun is not being discarded, she is being denied the chance to let his strength solve her problem for her. Their partnership therefore comes with a boundary. Traveling together does not mean borrowing the same victory. Liam tells Seolyun to rely on her own strength instead of leaning on the neighbor she followed. That instruction protects the difference between an alliance and a dependency. Vettel's job is to survive the Red Wolf encounter. Seolyun's job is to prove she can stand without using him as a crutch. Liam then explains why the trial matters to Vettel's body, not just to his reputation. Fang's power is something the young swordsman must learn to digest through danger. The lesson is not that the Devour has already happened, it is that repeated punishment can prepare the vessel. Every blow the body survives is framed as part of the training logic, not as permission to ignore the danger. A body of steel is forged to become stronger the more it is beaten. That is the tactical reason Liam sends Vettel alone. The trial must pressure the exact weakness it is meant to strengthen. The chapter ends with Fang's digestion condition still ahead of him, and the Red Wolf Brotherhood waiting beyond the darkness. At Petal's mansion, the Fang assignment from the previous chapter becomes an immediate operational choice. Vettel asks for a hideout, but he is already thinking about how to turn the threat into Liam's test. He wants a discreet base because an open stay would expose both his route and the Arhan registration identity. Then Vettel states the plan plainly. He intends to wipe out the Red Wolf force alone. Seol-yun is present, but the chapter does not turn every later hooded movement into proof that she is the attacker. Petal coughs and favors defense, because he knows the Red Wolf is not a normal bandit force. His caution is not cowardice, it is the judgment of a sick knight who understands what the village is facing. Petal would rather preserve the people and the place than gamble them on a frontal assault. The village is precious to him, which makes Vettel's solo promise a dangerous answer to a real problem. Vettel still sees the mission as a chance to test Fang rather than as a reason to retreat. Petal's warning therefore sets the tactical limit. The enemy must be approached with knowledge, not with confidence alone. The night operation begins as a controlled expedition toward a remote settlement, not a declared battlefield. Seol-yun's role remains beside the route, but the source does not securely assign every stealth action to her. Vettel carries the solo constraint forward, while the rest of the party becomes part of the surrounding uncertainty. No panel closes the question of who will strike first, and the recap keeps that question open. The Red Wolf camp lies beyond the ordinary roads, where darkness can hide both a hunter and a rumor. Vettel's assignment is therefore shaped by distance, poor visibility, and the need to learn the enemy's layout. The mission enters the exact environment where Fang's asymmetric tactics should matter most. Liam's trial and Patel's defense-first advice now pull in opposite directions. Vettel chooses the path that risks his body in exchange for information and a chance to break the raid. The remote operation is ready, but the chapter keeps the identity of the coming attacker deliberately unclaimed. The party reaches the mountain settlement under cover of night. A sudden strike takes control of the Red Wolf encounter before the bandits can organize. The choreography is rapid and controlled, but the source does not establish a face-to-face duel with a named protagonist. That uncertainty is part of the tactical advantage. The Red Wolf members do not know what they are fighting. The attack has begun and the camp's routine is already breaking apart. The route lies in the southern Iron Kingdom's Verdia mountain range, far from a normal town's support. The mountains surround an abandoned village whose isolation makes every rumor sound plausible. One rumor says the place is connected to necromancers. But the chapter treats that as fear and hearsay, not as proof that necromancy is present. The Red Wolf force benefits from that fear because it can make ordinary violence look supernatural from a distance. There are few witnesses, little help, and no reliable account of how many fighters are inside. Darkness becomes part of the battlefield before any sword is clearly identified. The operation depends on visibility asymmetry. The camp's lights expose the guards, while the hidden side can choose when to appear. The party moves through that asymmetry without the source assigning every movement to Vettel or Seol-yun. Even before the bandits speak, the abandoned buildings make the settlement feel like a place the world has already left behind. That isolation gives the Red Wolf members room to treat the previous village as disposable territory. The next scene moves inside the camp, where their own conversation reveals more than a clean scouting report could. The Red Wolf members talk about what happened to the previous village as if it were a finished chore. Men were killed, women were exploited, and the group is already bored with the place. Their boredom is not harmless. It shows how completely the Red Wolf force treats frontier lives as material to consume. They speak about the dead without grief, and the abused without consequence. The casual tone makes the moral stakes concrete without inventing victims or outcomes the panels do not show. Some of the men are considering leaving because the post has become boring. Others complain about guard duty and the lack of a better target. That complacency is exactly what a patient hunter would need. An injured or frightened bandit is suddenly confronted and pressured to cooperate. The attacker's advantage comes from timing and fear, not from a declared supernatural power. The bandits panic and begin using the village's necromancer rumor to explain what they cannot see. Their explanation is understandable, but the chapter never confirms that the rumor is true. The hidden side keeps moving while the camp loses its sense of superiority. A survivor is forced to answer questions instead of meeting the attacker in an open duel. The questions seek the captain, not a victory speech. Torches turn the remaining guards into silhouettes that can be tracked from the dark. Every light source becomes a liability because it shows the camp where the hunter is not. The guards keep guessing at the attacker's position while the attacker's position keeps changing. The Red Wolf group now has to reveal information simply to keep one wounded member alive. The assault is controlled pressure, not a fair contest between equal formations. That difference matters because the chapter is showing how a weaker fighter can dictate the terms of a stronger group. The attackers are not given time to regroup, and the information begins to point towards someone above ordinary bandit level. The hidden figure's identity is still deliberately withheld, only the tactical result is clear. A hooded, blue-eyed attacker appears in the Mountain Knight sequence, memorable but not canonically named. The visual resemblance is not enough to turn an open identity question into a fact. The Red Wolf members see a threat, not a confirmed necromancer or a confirmed ally. The hidden attacker keeps the interrogation moving before the camp can rebuild its defenses. By the time the Red Wolves understand the pattern, their guard line has already been broken. The question becomes simple: what does the captain know, and why is he more dangerous than the men around him? The answer begins with a label that sounds like an insult: runaway dog. The survivor says the Red Wolf captain is no ordinary bandit. He is described as a deserter knight who abandoned the Yellow Elephant organization. The word swordwalker raises the threat from criminal gang to trained elite. The chapter does not give that runaway a personal name. Nor does it prove that the captain, the hooded attacker, and every earlier glimpse are one person. The informant's fear is enough to explain why the Red Wolf force treated the captain as something above ordinary bandit rank. Previous losses to swordwalkers make the description sound like a warning, not a title used casually. The Red Wolf mission has therefore changed shape. Vettel is no longer approaching a generic camp. He is approaching a trained swordsman whose history may connect the bandits to a larger order. That connection remains a question, not a solved backstory. The phrase runaway dog points toward the Yellow Elephant knighthood, but the chapter stops before explaining what the deserter did. There is still no confirmed answer about the captain's allegiance, name, or next move. Then organized riders arrive to claim the trail for themselves. Elephant banners appear at the mountain settlement, replacing rumor with an official-looking search party. The Yellow Elephant knighthood has come looking for the runaway dog. Their arrival turns a hidden mountain hunt into a collision between organized factions. The riders carry authority, but the chapter does not reveal whether that authority will protect the village or tighten the trap. Meekin is identified as the vice captain representing the arriving organization. He is not the Red Wolf captain, and must not be merged with the unnamed runaway. Meekin asks where the runaway dog is. That question directly connects the new faction to the Red Wolf mystery without resolving the suspect's identity. The mountain operation now has two pressures: a hidden attacker inside the camp and an organized knighthood outside it. Neither pressure tells Vettel, Seo-yun, or the viewer who the runaway actually is. The next confrontation may be tactical, political, or both. The chapter closes on Meekin's demand, with the runaway dog, the captain, and the hidden attacker still unconfirmed as one person. The Yellow Elephant knighthood has reached the capital with incomplete intelligence about the Red Wolf violence. Their report says a runaway dog from the Yellow Elephant has been committing banditry under the Red Wolf name. The wording is an accusation, not a solved identity. The chapter does not tell us who the runaway dog is. That uncertainty matters because the same frontier violence is already connected to Patel's village. The knights move through the aftermath of a threat they only partly understand. One of them recognizes the man sheltering there, and the investigation suddenly becomes personal. He is Sir Patel of the Green Deer, a former famous sword walker, whose name still carries weight. The reputation explains why the knights react to him with recognition, even though he now looks far removed from a celebrated fighter. Patel's former standing was built on honor, not on the Red Wolf's predatory methods. Now his body is bloodied and visibly failing as he tries to face the danger around his village. The chapter identifies the limit plainly. Patel suffers from an incurable disease. Even in that state, Patel addresses the young master Arhan, keeping the caravan-linked identity distinction intact. For this recap, Arhan is the name Patel uses for the young man. Sir Vettel remains the protagonist's practical identity. The arrival of the knights therefore puts Patel's past, present illness, and the village's danger in the same room. Seo-yun stays close to Patel as an Eastern nurse and ally, but she is also carrying a weapon. That combination makes her useful in the crisis without turning her into a confirmed answer to every unseen attacker. Patel tells her not to act, because a reckless defense could make the already fragile situation worse. Seo-yun does not accept the command as proof that the Iron Kingdom's justice is fair. She says the Iron Kingdom may be a place where might makes right, judging the system around them. Her anger is understandable, but the immediate order still stands: do not turn a guarded shelter into another battlefield. The Yellow Elephant Party has come for the runaway dog, not to restore Patel's old life for him. Their incomplete report leaves the real relationship between that fugitive and the Red Wolf Brotherhood unresolved. The group can describe the crime, but it cannot yet name the culprit with confidence. The chapter then shifts from the knight's incomplete intelligence to a darker lesson about the Red Wolf's methods. Fang is introduced through history rather than a face, an anonymous assassin whose victories depended on asymmetry. He was not remembered as the strongest fighter in a clean frontal exchange. His advantage came from choosing the moment and angle that made strength irrelevant. That is why the Red Wolf threat cannot be evaluated only by comparing sword power head-on. Fang's dirty tricks begin with surprise, striking before the target can build a proper defense. He aims for weak points instead of wasting effort on a stronger surface. He can also win by making a sleeping opponent helpless before the fight has properly begun. Intoxication is another opening, because a dulled body cannot react to a precise attack. None of those examples proves who is attacking this village. They explain why the danger is difficult to read. The tactical profile therefore raises the cost of a careless patrol without supplying a culprit. The village's guards remain exposed to someone who chooses when the fight starts. They cannot rely on armor numbers or a formal challenge if the first blow has already selected a weak point. That is the practical meaning of the Fang lesson. Readiness must begin before the enemy appears. The next images return to the current night, where a guard is caught in exactly that kind of uneven encounter. A hidden figure approaches through darkness and speed rather than announcing a fair duel. The guard's position collapses before he can turn the situation into a measured fight. The scene echoes Fang's methods, but the packet does not state that the historical assassin owns this attack. The attacker pressures an injured Red Wolf member instead of wasting time on a clean exchange. Fear becomes an information weapon. The wounded man is forced to answer questions while he is already losing control of the encounter. The answers point toward the Brotherhood's captain, but the captain's name and face are still withheld. That keeps the interrogation useful without turning an unnamed role into a new canon character. The knight remains almost lightless, and the attacker moves without torches to reveal a recognizable allegiance. That visual restraint is part of the evidence. A silhouette can suggest a method while still refusing a name. The current attack therefore sits beside the Fang history as an unresolved comparison, not a solved reveal. A guard is struck before he can raise a defense, showing the tactical risk in one brutal beat. The blow is efficient because the target is already compromised, not because the attacker has been proven stronger in every situation. The Red Wolf member's injury makes him easier to pressure and harder to trust as a complete witness. That distinction preserves the scene's cause and effect. Surprise creates control, and control extracts partial information. The attacker leaves the captain as a direction to pursue, not as a person the audience can already identify. The village is still surrounded by unanswered questions: who commands the Red Wolf, who the runaway dog is, and who hides under the hood. Before those questions can be answered, a new force reaches the village from the road. The Yellow Elephant knighthood arrives with enough presence to change the balance of the scene. Their arrival does not erase the earlier ambush. It adds official pressure to a threat already moving in the dark. The party's equipment and formation suggest a search, not a cleanly targeted confrontation with a named enemy. They are following the runaway dog report while the Red Wolf violence continues to muddy the trail. That overlap makes the investigation more dangerous, because the official hunters and the unseen attacker may be reading different clues. No panel here confirms that the runaway dog, the hooded attacker, and the Red Wolf captain are the same person. The safe recap line is narrower. Several leads now converge on the same village, but the identities remain open. The chapter returns to Fang's reputation to explain why a patient assassin could thrive in that confusion. He was chosen for what he could do from an angle, not for what he would prove in a tournament ring. The present attacker uses a similarly unreadable rhythm, but similarity is the limit of the evidence. The chapter calls Fang an anonymous assassin, and this recap keeps his owner and present connection unknown. That is why the attack is described through behavior, surprise, weak points, and compromised targets, instead of a guessed name. A sleeping guard would be especially vulnerable to that pattern. The current hooded figure is still only a visual clue, not a confirmed version of Seol Yun or anyone else. The blue eyes invite the comparison, while the absence of a formal name prevents the comparison from becoming fact. The recap therefore holds two truths together. The image may resemble Seol Yun, and the attacker remains unconfirmed. The search party has no better answer, because even the strongest visual hint is not an identification. A guard lowers his defense for a moment, and the tactical lesson becomes immediate again. Fang's method is dangerous, precisely because it waits for that small opening. The sleeping and lower defense examples are tactical illustrations, not proof that the current victim was attacked by Fang himself. By refusing that shortcut, the story keeps the mystery open while making the danger legible. The Yellow Elephant's search continues through the same territory where Red Wolf members have already been hurt. Their mission has official language, but the knight still obeys the ambusher's timing. That imbalance is the chapter's tactical spine. Information arrives late, and violence arrives first. The hooded figure delivers a final strike from concealment, then disappears before a name can attach to the act. The image is forceful, but it still does not establish that the figure is the Red Wolf captain. Nor does it establish that the figure is the runaway dog being hunted by the yellow elephant. Those possibilities stay in the chapter as questions, not answers supplied by a dramatic silhouette. The earlier recognition of Padel remains the only firm identity reveal in the official party's arrival. The blue-eyed hooded image may be visually consistent with Seo-yun, but its attribution remains provisional. That caution matters because Seo-yun is also on the page as Petal's armed Eastern ally, and the chapter keeps both images unresolved. Meanwhile, the Red Wolf captain is still only a target named by an injured witness. The witness's information points forward, but it does not close the case. Then a large figure with red eyes enters the visual field, drawn toward the scent of blood. Its size and eyes make the threat feel different from the earlier shadowed attacker, but the chapter does not give it a name. The scene offers no safe basis for calling it Fang, the captain, the runaway dog, or a confirmed enemy. It only follows the smell of blood, leaving the chapter on a threat that is present, hungry, and still unnamed. The first answer is not a face but a silent camp, tents, bodies, a dead fire, and a red wolf position after an attack. A wounded survivor says the men beside him were drinking moments ago, and now they are dead. His report widens the horror. This was not one ambush in one tent, because other sleeping places were struck as well. Everywhere the same clue appears: bodies without noisy struggle, cooling fires, and a camp that never raised an alarm. The survivors search for an explanation, but the faces around the camp show only shock and the scale of the loss. Another survivor points to more men being taken out in the other tents, turning a private murder into a coordinated massacre. The camp has no attacker to point at, only the evidence that someone moved between the tents without being noticed. That silence becomes the first tactical clue. Whoever did this did not win by trading blows, but by choosing openings before anyone could respond. Then the investigation gains a commander. A massive red-haired fighter steps through the blood-scented camp and takes in the damage. He reads the scene instead of mourning it, following the bodies and the smell as if they were marks on a battlefield. The blood in the air connects the scattered casualties, suggesting that the attack moved through the camp rather than ending at one tent. The red-eyed figure studies the aftermath while the surviving Brotherhood members wait for his judgment. His presence changes the survivors from witnesses into a defensive line, because the same killer may still be close. The art identifies him plainly, Captain Murphy of the Red Wolf Brotherhood. The title gives the camp a named defender, but not a culprit. The evidence still points only to a skilled assassin. Murphy turns from investigator to defender, moving through the tents as the surviving fighters brace for another attack. Before he can reconstruct everything, the attacker reappears among the bodies and turns the crime scene back into an active assault. A red aura cuts through the night, and the hooded intruder closes with force that looks far beyond an ordinary camp killer. The operative strikes close, using tents and fallen bodies to keep defenders from forming a response. The attacker advances through the camp with decisive violence, proving that the massacre is still happening in front of Murphy. Murphy's side reaches for weapons, but the intruder is already inside their reaction time. A hooded silhouette cuts between the survivors while the red pressure of the assault keeps every exchange brutally short. The intruder's bite and weapon violence gives the attack a monstrous physical signature, not the clean distance of a hidden spell. The blue-eyed operative stays mobile among the tents, appearing where the defenders thought the darkness was empty. Murphy finally catches a glimpse of the hood and the bright eyes, but recognition comes after the attacker has already changed position. The hostile figure slips out of the next line of sight, leaving Murphy's side with another opening and no stable target. The fight stops being about ordinary sight. The hooded operative frames the path as the system that governs this kind of combat. A focused confrontation begins around the operative as path appears as a living sensory field. This field extends through the body, surrounding the sword walker in blue light. A perfected path becomes an additional sense beyond a stronger aura. That extra sense lets a sword walker read movement and danger beyond normal human perception. Against an assassin, the path can decide whether a hidden step becomes an opening or disappears into the night. Murphy reads the sensory situation from inside the camp, trying to turn the path from a shield into a way of locating the intruder. The operative understands the danger as well. A single mistake against Murphy can make the path explanation irrelevant. The surviving fighters examine the bodies as forensic evidence rather than treating the massacre as an unexplained curse. The wounds point toward precise attacks, each one aimed at a vital place instead of a prolonged exchange. The timing is what unsettles them most. Several people were removed so quietly that no neighboring tent reacted in time. The pattern suggests one assassin who understood the body, the guard, and the exact moment a victim could not answer. Buddies and extinguished camp spaces make the single vital strike theory visible across the perimeter. The clean deaths are too consistent for random panic, yet they still do not identify the person who ordered them. The investigators compare known methods and consider Yellow Elephant, but the killing pattern is explicitly said not to match that method. That rules out a method match, not every possible connection, so Yellow Elephant remains a reference rather than a confirmed culprit. The more they compare the wounds, the clearer the assassin profile becomes. One fighter, many openings, and no wasted motion. Murphy's side is left with attribution still open, while the unseen opponent prepares to control the battlefield itself. The campfires go out, and darkness spreads across the perimeter until the familiar tent lines stop offering reliable protection. Murphy loses the ordinary visual anchor he used to track the operative, forcing his path and his instincts to carry more of the fight. The hooded figure moves through the blacked-out camp while the red-eyed defender searches for a sound, a shape, or a pressure he can trust. A silhouette appears at the edge of the darkness, then vanishes before Murphy can turn the sighting into a target. Murphy swings into the black space, but the strike meets only the uncertainty the attacker created. The battlefield now favors the fighter who can use the path and the darkness together, instead of relying on sight alone. Murphy searches and engages inside the extinguished perimeter, cutting at a threat that refuses to stay in one place. The operative uses the gaps between flashes of visibility to move closer without giving Murphy a steady line to follow. A blade flashes at short range, forcing Murphy to defend before he can finish reading the attacker's position. The hooded fighter surfaces beside the red aura for only an instant, then folds back into the surrounding black. Murphy's reaction shows how quickly the darkness can turn a confident read into empty space. The exchange closes around steel, breath, and sudden movement, with neither fighter given a safe disengagement. The operative keeps the initiative through timing and sensory denial, rather than claiming superiority in raw force. The hooded figure remains difficult to track as the duel continues through the dark camp. Murphy lunges toward the last reliable trace, but the target has already shifted outside the expected path. A close-range blade exchange finally brings both fighters into the same visible beat, without resolving who controls the next one. The operative slips away from the pressure and keeps the darkness between his body and Murphy's next strike. A half-seen counter flashes through the black, but the panel gives no final wound or result to close the duel. Murphy continues to defend the Brotherhood camp, while the assassin continues the mission that brought him there. Each missed grab and blade path reinforces the same advantage. The hooded fighter chooses when to become visible. The darkness keeps the two combatants close enough to threaten one another and far enough apart to deny a clean finish. The exchange remains live, with Murphy still standing and the operative still embedded in the black perimeter. At the end of the exchange, the darkness still holds the hooded silhouette. Murphy's survival or defeat is not shown as a final resolution. Only then does the figure offer a factional clue. The hooded operative identifies himself as an assassin of Crowd. The language reaches from night toward freedom, but the thought stops before explaining the client, identity, or mission. The fight resumes without a verdict. From Murphy's side, the little gladiator is no longer a seedling but a growing threat. Whatever label Murphy uses, the operative's progress has changed the terms of the duel before either fighter can safely step away. Murphy demands to know who sent the assassin, turning the unresolved camp attack into a direct question between two blades. The question is not curiosity. It is Murphy trying to protect the Red Wolf Brotherhood by finding the hand behind the attack. He calls the operative expensive, implying that a fighter of this level must have been chosen for a purpose. Merchant groups and Yellow Elephant are raised as possibilities, but the chapter keeps every sponsor theory unconfirmed. The hooded figure answers with movement rather than a client name, advancing while Murphy's path presses for a readable response. Murphy's field closes around the operative, making every step a test of whether the assassin can cross the space without being caught. The operative keeps the exchange narrow, protecting the mission while refusing to give Murphy the explanation he wants. The confrontation tightens around red pressure and blue movement, with both fighters searching for the first mistake. A single opening would decide the next beat, so Murphy forces the operative to answer instead of simply retreating into the dark. The client question remains open as the fight moves from investigation into a contest of path control. Murphy's earlier dismissal disappears. The red assault now arrives with enough speed and force to make one clean hit decisive. The operative slips around the first pressure, using movement to survive the power difference rather than pretending it does not exist. Red force and blue energy collide in the camp, bringing the two combatants into a close-path clash. The hooded fighter's blade flashes across Murphy's line while the red aura tries to close every escape route. The operative appears where Murphy expects the path to catch him, then shifts before the field can become a trap. Murphy's red reaches toward an empty position, showing that the assassin is not merely moving faster, but evading the expected sense itself. A red strike cuts through the space the operative occupied a moment earlier. The hooded figure avoids the full force and keeps the duel from becoming a direct exchange of strength. A thrown blue blade and Murphy's red response turn the clearing into intersecting attack lines. The operative appears inside the gap of Murphy's expected path red, giving the first concrete proof that the field can be bypassed. Murphy's senses catch the target too late, and frustration replaces the confidence of his earlier tracking. The operative turns the brief opening into another attack, then withdraws before Murphy can make contact. The red and blue presentations remain continuous with the path-based duel from the camp, but neither color proves a formal named technique. Murphy realizes that the opponent's advantage is not a stronger path, it is the ability to step outside the part Murphy is reading. The exchange continues at close range, each fighter forcing the other to spend attention on the next half-second. No blow settles the fight, because the operative's evasion keeps the path contest alive, instead of converting it into a victory. The operative frames darkness as an ally, making the night itself part of the method used against Murphy. An incomplete path can still matter if it slips through a stronger field at exactly the right instant. The method is not to overpower Murphy's senses, but to find the gap those senses cannot cover. A narrow opening forms between the red pressure and the operative's disappearing movement. Murphy's path searches for the missing signal, while the operative moves through the blind interval it created. The hooded figure vanishes from the expected line, leaving Murphy staring at a field that should have contained him. A reappearance follows immediately, turning absence into a new angle of attack. The operative uses the momentary confusion to cross the dangerous portion of Murphy's defense. Murphy's red force answers, but it still reaches only the place the assassin has just abandoned. The fight now demonstrates the difference between seeing a body and sensing where that body will be. The operative pierces Murphy's path and slips through the gap, turning an abstract explanation into a visible combat maneuver. Murphy feels the field break around the attack even though his eyes never completely lose the hooded figure. The gap is brief, but it is enough for the operative to pass the strongest portion of the guard. The operative's incomplete development becomes useful, precisely because it does not move like the complete path Murphy expects. The explanation leaves Murphy with a dangerous conclusion. His field can be crossed without being defeated head-on. The operative keeps attacking before the opponent can turn that conclusion into a counter. Then the first-person voice strips away the legend of the invincible assassin. In carrying out the mission, the speaker was never the strong one. He admits that against powerful enemies he had to borrow the power of an ally. That admission changes the trick from a sudden miracle into a planned answer to a mismatch in raw strength. The unnamed ally remains unnamed, but the borrowed power gives the operative enough knowledge to challenge Murphy's sensing field. The prerequisite is deliberate. The operative first flaunts his presence, so the opponent will focus on the signal. Once Murphy commits his attention, the apparent target becomes the setup for the disappearance that follows. Breath becomes a controlled signal, offered to Murphy's senses instead of left as an accidental clue. Cloth friction and small movements are added to the picture, giving the path more information than the operative truly intends to reveal. Footsteps sharpen the false presence, directing Murphy toward a body that is already preparing to erase itself. Murphy's five senses begin to focus on the decoy pattern, and the operative waits for that focus to become rigid. The small sounds are then removed, creating a contrast so extreme that presence turns into a kind of absence. The operative manipulates the sensory focus before disappearing through the opening it has created. Murphy reaches for the missing signal, but the field now reports silence where a body should be. Five senses that normally reinforce one another instead point toward the wrong conclusion. That short blind interval is enough to move through the strongest part of Murphy's guard. The operative's body crosses the dark lane while the red aura searches behind him. Murphy realizes the disappearance is not teleportation. The operative emerges inside the gap and turns that sensory failure into a close-range attack. His blades move through the interval before Murphy can rebuild a stable read. The darkness method therefore chains two steps together: make the opponent notice, then remove the signal it noticed. Murphy swings into the returning silhouette, still dangerous even while his senses are being manipulated. The operative keeps the pressure close, refusing to give Murphy time to turn the explanation into a new defense. The hooded figure stays inside the attack lane, using the blind interval rather than waiting for a perfect opening. Murphy's red response forces the operative to move again before the path can recover. The operative gives the method its simplest description: I become darkness. The phrase describes a tactical state built from sensory denial and path gap movement, not a formally confirmed named ability. The hooded fighter carries that state into another close exchange, while Murphy tries to force the hidden pattern into the open. No victory is shown. The method has created an advantage, but Murphy remains an active opponent in the same fight. The operative finally attributes the method to digestion of an assassin's memories, confirming a source of tactical knowledge without proving Fang is complete. Those memories supply experience, but the chapter does not define how much has been integrated, or what remains hidden. Murphy presses for the meaning of the strange method while defending against the next strike. The operative interrupts the question with another attack, keeping survival and mission completion ahead of explanation. The unnamed ally and the assassin memory remain linked to the method, but neither identity is resolved in the exchange. A blade cuts through the close space as Murphy tries to recover a stable sense of the operative's position. The fight keeps moving because the darkness advantage is temporary while the memory source deepens the mystery without ending the duel. The close-range attack continues against Murphy. He is still defending while the hooded operative keeps attacking. The chapter closes inside that unresolved exchange, with the operative's method exposed but its final result still out of reach. Murphy's recovery gives the next chapter a harder opponent than the one the hooded operative first measured in the dark. Yellow Elephant's analysis treats Murphy as a fighter who may have reached rock bottom and still remained an exceptional killer. The comparison reaches back to a time when Murphy was a knight, adding a dangerous history without supplying a full biography. His present appearance hides how much violence the old reputation still contains. The art-backed label is Berserker, a combat identity attached to Murphy rather than a separate person. For the hooded operative, that label predicts the cost of one clean hit. He tracks Murphy's hands and aura. The duel is therefore a clash with a recognized Berserker threat, not a routine Red Wolf defense. Murphy's red assault surges forward and the operative recognizes that a single mistake could split him in two. The speed of the attack has changed as completely as its power. The operative evades the first heavy line, choosing distance over the impossible gamble of matching force directly. Murphy pursues before the missed strike can become a reset. Every red impact now carries the threat of a fight-ending injury. The hooded fighter keeps his body narrow and his feet moving, refusing to let the Berserker fix the range. Murphy drives a red attack through the clearing while the operative turns away from the center of the blow. Blue movement answers red pressure, but only enough to create the next survivable angle. The operative's defense is already a calculation of what cannot be blocked and what can still be avoided. The forest clearing gives both fighters room to pursue, but no safe route out of the lethal exchange. The operative's blue energy cuts across Murphy's red force, keeping technique and positioning in the contest. Murphy follows with another heavy swing, refusing to let the blue movement become a retreat. The hooded fighter trades movement and strikes instead of meeting every blow head-on. A parry turns the line just enough for the operative to slip clear of the strongest part of the impact. Murphy continues pressing, his red aura making even a short pause dangerous. The operative's answer remains spacing, timing, and the search for a weakness rather than raw power. Red pressure fills the frame, while the blue-eyed fighter waits for the instant after Murphy commits his weight. The next blue strike is selective, aimed at keeping Murphy from closing the lane completely. The exchange stays balanced by movement, not because either fighter has settled the other. The operative buys time to understand the Berserker's rhythm before risking a counter. A blue movement and strike beat shows the assassin-derived kit still functioning under Murphy's red pressure. Murphy swings through the opening and keeps the pursuit alive when the first counter does not finish the exchange. The close fight compresses into steel, aura, and the small angles that decide whether a body is caught. The operative refuses to give Murphy a stationary target, even while the pressure drives him backward. Murphy's strength forces the hooded fighter to spend every step on survival. No clean blow settles the contest. The Berserker remains physically overwhelming, and the operative remains technically elusive. The operative drops into a steadier stance, breathing and measuring the unfinished method instead of panicking. The pause is not surrender. It is the moment when the fighter decides what kind of risk the next exchange requires. His remaining blades and his own incomplete development become part of the calculation. He compares unfinished iron with a sword that must be tempered, recognizing that maturity will not arrive by waiting safely. The answer is a direct clash. Controlled contact with Murphy will become the tempering step for the unfinished method. The two fighters collide again, this time with the operative choosing the danger instead of merely reacting to it. His defense is stated as a hierarchy beginning with movement and ending only where the body gives him a counter. First, he will dodge the force he cannot absorb. Second, he will parry the lines he can redirect without taking the full weight. Then he will cut flesh wherever bone is too hard to take directly. The plan is not reckless brawling. It is a way to reduce Murphy piece by piece while preserving a path to survive. Murphy keeps advancing with brute force pressure, forcing the plan to work against a moving Berserker. The operative slips around another red attack and searches for the soft opening behind it. The operative chooses to dodge and parry, keeping his defense focused as the plan promised. A parry turns the incoming line while the operative's body stays outside the bite of the blow. The fight treats anatomy as a tactical map. Flesh can be carved away before harder bone is challenged. Murphy's force leaves little room for error, so the operative refuses to spend a movement without purpose. The Berserker's teeth and bite enter the exchange as another close-range threat. Red pressure surges around Murphy's monstrous physicality, making a failed dodge more dangerous than a failed strike. The operative slips over the attack and keeps his blades aligned with the next opening. He trades a blue strike for space, never allowing Murphy to secure the body blow he wants. Murphy's bite presses into the lane, a distinct Berserker marker that turns every close approach into a threat. The operative moves just outside the teeth and keeps the exchange from becoming a contest of jaw against armor. Murphy remains dangerous even when the line is red, because his strength can recover from a near miss instantly. Blue energy flashes again as the operative searches for a weak spot rather than trying to break Murphy's hardest target. The two fighters stay locked in a lethal rhythm with no safe disengagement shown. The operative's movement is working defensively, but the berserker is still active and physically overwhelming. A fresh red surge forces another dodge and keeps the pressure on the unfinished method. The operative waits for Murphy's next commitment, looking for the instant when force becomes exposure. A clean hit would still be decisive, so the opening must be created rather than hoped for. The hooded fighter lowers his line and prepares to dive through the space after Murphy's heavy attack. He identifies that a weak spot must exist somewhere inside the berserker's overwhelming pattern. The operative commits to the opening instead of returning to passive defense. Two blades angle toward the exposed lane as Murphy gathers the force for another committed swing. Murphy's attack carries him forward, giving the operative the exact timing window the plan required. The hooded fighter dives through the opening while the red strike passes across the space he just left. Murphy is shocked that the heavy attack was dodged, and the operative keeps moving toward the counter. The opening is real, but it is not yet a victory. Murphy is still present, and the counter still has to land. The operative turns the dodge into a precise cut, using Murphy's committed momentum against him. A heavy counter finally lands and drives through the berserker's red pressure. Murphy's face and mouth show the cost of the strike, while the hooded figure preserves the forward initiative. The counter is powerful enough to produce a visible wound and a full-body reaction, but it does not remove Murphy from the fight. Red force continues across the clearing, showing that the berserker's resistance has been tested rather than broken. The operative searches for a retreat or finish window before Murphy can rebuild his offense. The successful strike creates only a temporary advantage, because the opponent's resilience keeps the duel live. Both combatants remain in the clearing, with the next exchange already forming around the counter's impact. Murphy regains his stance instead of staying down, reasserting the resilience that defines the berserker label. The operative sees the recovery and understands that the counter bought time, not safety. Murphy admits that the blow and punch nearly cost him consciousness, but his eyes and aura remain active. The red-eyed fighter turns the pain into another approach, refusing to give the operative a clean exit. He promises to return the favor, making retaliation the chapter's confirmed direction. The hooded operative remains under immediate danger despite landing the largest counter of the exchange. Murphy's presence closes the distance again, keeping the fight in the same unresolved lane. The chapter ends on the berserker's looming bite and face threat, not on a kill, surrender, or victory. Murphy's retaliation arrives immediately, and the red aura makes clear that the successful counter did not end the fight. The hooded operative measures the renewed pressure while the berserker's savagery continues to rise with his strength. Every missed red strike still carries the threat of a one-hit finish. The operative's damaged remaining sword limits the number of exchanges he can afford. Murphy's mouth and red-eyed intensity turn the close distance into a physical danger before the blades even meet. The operative keeps moving because standing still would let one clean blow decide everything. His survival instinct points toward retreat, but the mission and the narrowing battlefield pull him back toward the clash. Murphy's savagery grows more ferocious as his strength rises and the operative recognizes that the margin is almost gone. A single clean hit would end the operative's remaining chance, so selective engagement becomes mandatory. The hooded fighter evades another red line, rather than trusting the damaged weapon to absorb it. The compromised sword forces him to conserve every possible angle and avoid a contest of durability. Murphy presses into the opening, trying to turn the damaged weapon into a permanent disadvantage. The operative's mind urges retreat while his body continues to search for a way back into the fight. The red aura fills the clearing, leaving no safe route that does not pass through danger. Every exchange now carries the same question: can the operative create an opening before Murphy creates a finish? He chooses to stand and fight despite the broken rhythm, the damaged sword, and the instinct to withdraw. That decision turns defensive survival into a deliberate last stand inside the same active duel. The present fight gives way to the memory that explains why retreat is not the only thing the operative sees. The free city of Crowd has lost its freedom, and that loss is placed behind the operative's choice to keep fighting. Crowd's streets and people appear as a history of pressure rather than a detached political explanation. The memory ties blood, binding, and public fear to the city that is supposed to be free. The crowd sees the operative, while the memory frames a road built through danger, where survival was earned by continuing through life or death struggles. Firma's arena is named as part of that preparation, the place where the operative honed skills under real stakes. The arena experience matters because it taught him to keep moving when a fight offers no comfortable answer. Crowd's lost freedom and Firma's lethal training now meet inside the same present crisis. The memory does not erase the danger of Murphy. It explains why the operative accepts the danger instead of waiting for a perfect escape. There is no opening and no easy darkness to hide in, so the speaker prepares to spill blood and keep moving. The operative's past turns the damaged weapon into a challenge rather than a reason to stop. The crowd firma history supplies resolve, but it does not resolve the identity of the hooded fighter or the outcome of the duel. The present combat returns through blue and white motion, carrying the crowd memory back into the clearing. The operative refuses to let the fight end as a powerless death and re-enters the exchange after the apparent crisis point. The memory becomes public. Crowd citizens are shown under a power that expects them to bow their heads. An unnamed speaker calls on the citizens to remember that they still possess the will to fight. The city's loss of rights is made visible through authority, bodies, and a crowd forced to witness the violence. The resistance language rejects submission, asking the people to stand even when fear is the easier answer. The address begins with the citizens of crowd, turning a city name into a collective call to attention. The public speech links visibility with resistance. Do not bow, do not look away, and do not surrender the will to act. The citizens absorb the shock while the red-caped authority and the crowd occupy the same public space. Crowd's crisis is not presented as one person's private grievance. The city's population is part of the stake. The public scene gathers bodies, guards, and witnesses around a struggle that cannot remain hidden. The resistance gains force by refusing to let the authority define silence as obedience. Crowd's people move through the pressure together, turning fear into collective motion. Even when visibility fails, the message is to keep moving rather than wait for the fog to clear. That fog mirrors the operative's combat method. Action must continue when sight is unreliable. The public address, therefore, becomes both a civic demand and a tactical metaphor for the present fight. The resistance refuses to submit to the darkness, or let the darkness make the violence invisible. Movement starts around the authority and the guards, turning the slogan into a physical confrontation. Citizens press forward through fear while the public space removes the safety of hiding. The crowd's refusal to look away becomes its own form of pressure against the power above it. No single named hero is assigned to this flashback. The resistance is carried by the collective. The citizens keep moving despite limited sight, echoing the operative's decision to fight without a safe route. Buddies and guards collide in the public space, showing the resistance becoming action rather than remaining a speech. The fog and darkness image keeps the ideological struggle connected to the battlefield outside the memory. Shock spreads through the public aftermath as the violence reaches a courtyard and tower-like space. Officials, bodies, and onlookers frame the cost of a confrontation that has become impossible to conceal. A red-caped authority stands inside the scene, but the art gives no safe personal name for that figure. A hooded figure is present in the same history, yet the flashback does not identify every person as a locked character. The public setting strips away the protection of hidden movement and forces the conflict into view. Crowd's freedom crisis is shown through the visible reaction of citizens and officials rather than a complete historical explanation. The red-caped authority remains a visual role only, while the crowd absorbs the consequence of the violence. The historical event stays cautious and unnamed, preserving the political pressure without inventing a biography. The public violence holds on the authority, the crowd, and the cost of refusing submission before the citizens gather again. Crowd citizens gather amid the bloodshed, bringing the scattered fear into one collective presence. Their shock becomes anger and motion as the public space fills with people who refuse to disappear. The cry is direct for freedom. The collective claim gives the memory its emotional center. The voices rise around the wounded and the guards, turning the city's suffering into a demand that cannot be ignored. Freedom is not treated as a private reward. It is the reason the crowd continues to stand together. More bodies fill the public space, but the movement of the citizens keeps the scene from becoming only an aftermath. The red-caped authority remains unnamed while the crowd's resistance becomes the clearly supported identity of the sequence. The city's people occupy the frame as owners of a place whose freedom has been taken from them. The public violence and the repeated call for freedom turn crowd into a civic belonging rather than only a faction name. The crowd keeps moving through the confrontation, making collective will the counterweight to imposed silence. Fear remains visible, but the citizens do not surrender the space to the authority alone. The memory closes around the phrase, "This is our crowd," claiming the city even while its freedom is under attack. The claim gives the operative a motive larger than surviving one duel. His darkness is tied to a city seeking freedom. The flashback prepares to return to the clearing, carrying crowd's collective resolve into the next attack. The duel returns with blue and purple force meeting Murphy's red pressure in the present. The operative launches through the blue-white exchange, converting the memory of resistance into a physical attack. Murphy reacts as the attack reaches a new threshold, but his red aura remains active around the impact. The collision keeps both fighters inside the same unresolved exchange, instead of granting either a final victory. The operative drives forward with the resolve that the flashback supplied, forcing Murphy to answer at close range. He directs the attack toward the darkest darkness of crowd, linking the present method to the city's lost freedom. The final exchange gathers blue and red force around the two combatants, with the operative still trying to break through. Murphy is shocked by the strike, but the panel does not show a death or a completed defeat. The operative reports that his path has been broken, turning the damage to his combat field into the chapter's clearest state change. The two forces collide again, while the operative continues acting instead of treating the path rupture as a finished outcome. Murphy remains an active red-eyed opponent as the hooded fighter presses the attack through the broken rhythm. The chapter ends on the last eligible impact frame. The hooded operative is still striking Murphy, and the fight remains unresolved. The chapter opens after a roadside purge. Bodies lie scattered while a blonde young swordsman remains standing among the wreckage. He is already carrying the strain of a lesson that has pushed his sword beyond ordinary movement and into a private inner path. The path answers with force, turning his attempt to advance into a violent test of whether his will can keep its shape. Every step is less about copying a technique and more about refusing to let the line of his own sword bend. The lesson strips away borrowed certainty. The path can only become his when his will supplies the direction. The pressure rises until the exercise stops looking like practice and starts looking like a narrow bridge over failure. He breaks through one violent turn of the path, but the breakthrough leaves his body visibly behind his intention. The path has not become safe, it has only become legible enough for him to recognize what he is trying to build. The light flares around him as the inner route holds for a moment, proving the idea without pretending the cost is gone. He is thrown through another turn, and the lesson makes its warning plain. A correct path can still break an unready body. The final exchange of the exercise lands as a hard stop rather than a victory pose. Liam remains beside the lesson as a spectral guide, explaining that the path of steel is defined by resolve rather than imitation. The protagonist absorbs the point, exhausted but alert to the fact that the path has answered him at all. Liam then narrows the lesson. The entry point is not mastery, only the first readable line through a much larger discipline. The ground of the inner path breaks into jagged light, showing how quickly understanding can outrun physical control. The fracture threatens to swallow the exercise, and the protagonist has to hold his attention together one more time. A burst of blue force answers that effort, not as a completed technique but as proof that his will can still reach the blade. The impact settles into a single line, leaving the new path recognized but the swordsman physically spent. Liam frames the result carefully. The path does not bend for comfort, and the body will need time before it can follow. The spectral mentor watches the young caravan heir with the patience of someone measuring a dangerous beginning. His warning is not a dismissal, it is the exact cost of moving forward with a path that has finally become personal. By the time the lesson releases him, the breakthrough is real, but repeating it immediately would only invite another collapse. That exhaustion follows him back to the roadside, where he is found barely upright after the bandit clearing. His face still carries the blue-eyed focus of the lesson, even though his posture says the body has not caught up. Liam's spectral presence gives way to the practical world as the young swordsman is confronted by the people who came looking for him. He steadies himself, and the scene confirms that survival and victory are not the same thing when the lesson has taken everything from him. A nearby voice calls him young Master Arhan as Seolian and Patel reach him together, turning the isolated aftermath into a guarded reunion. The camp gives the chapter a brief pocket of stillness before the nightly dispute catches up with them. The young swordsman's reaction is restrained. The bandits are gone, but the consequences of that clearing are already approaching. Seolian, identifiable by her long brown to purple hair and dark coat, gives the first warning about the honor culture moving toward them. She and the protagonist share the aftermath, while Petalaw's presence makes clear that the bandit victory is tied to a larger dispute. The bodies are identified as the remains of a wiped-out bandit group, establishing the concrete event that has drawn the knight's attention. The protagonist does not celebrate. He looks toward the approaching problem as the word victory becomes a source of pressure. Petal, the bearded former knight, is the person the approaching honor dispute will target. The yellow elephant presence arrives with confidence, and the first gesture is less a formal duel than a display of overwhelming pressure. Gold force presses into the clearing, forcing the group to recognize that the knights are not treating the bandit incident as a minor complaint. The pressure becomes a physical advance, but the panel still gives no winner and no completed exchange. The yellow elephant representative calls Patel a washed-up relic and treats his stained honor as a public problem. A golden impact follows the insult, escalating the argument from words into a threat of violence. Petala's past is raised as evidence, and the dispute begins to sound like an institutional judgment rather than a personal grudge. The forest road becomes a makeshift court, with armed figures arriving before anyone has stated the formal terms of a duel. The young protagonist reads the approach as trouble, but the source still withholds who will actually stand in the fight. Seolian explains that the knighthood's honor language can turn one disputed act into a demand for public correction. Liama's spectral image remains a separate mentor presence in the chapter's visual language. He is not Patel and not Hegel. The final warning from the spectral lesson hangs over the living dispute. Resolve matters, but resolve does not erase the body as limits. The confrontation finally reaches drawn weapons, with force and posture signaling an honor threshold rather than a settled contract. The first exchange is sharp enough to change the mood, but it does not establish the combatant terms or result. The yellow elephant side presses forward, treating the confrontation as a demonstration of superiority. The response lands as a heavier escalation, with the protagonist and Patel still visually distinct inside the confusion. Impact follows impact, and the surrounding knights become witnesses to a dispute that has not yet been formally named. An aura-heavy beat raises the stakes again, but the art gives no acceptance, surrender, or winner to narrate. Patel is shown under the pressure, his illness and reputation now inseparable from the question of whether he can answer the accusation. The Yellow Elephant Knight's armor and gold-lit presence establish faction identity without assigning a later name that the chapter has not earned. The clearing settles only long enough to ask who caused the disturbance. The answer and the formal challenge remain ahead. The accusation is repeated against the Yellow Elephant standard, turning the phrase tarnished honor into the chapter's public pressure point. A demand for the responsible party cuts through the group, still stopping short of a formal duel declaration. The surrounding knights close ranks, making the confrontation feel institutional, even though the source has not fixed the legal terms. Patel remains the visual center of the accusation, his old knightly identity exposed to the eyes of the faction that once measured him. The young protagonist faces the pressure without yet claiming the role of challenger or champion. The red-aged silhouette of the confrontation suggests violence is imminent, but the story still refuses to resolve who will carry the burden. Patel and the young swordsman share the field, preserving the difference between the sick knight and the younger fighter who may answer later. Patel's close expression leaves the chapter at the edge of a decision, not beyond it. Mounted Yellow Elephant Knights invoke the honor of their order, as the clearing becomes a stage for judgment. Patel's mouth tightens as the old knight's reputation and the immediate threat meet in one unresolved moment. A gold-aged sword movement cuts through the dispute, the clearest sign yet that the next beat may become an honor duel. The impact lands amid armor and bodies, but no panel confirms a formal acceptance, a combatant, or an outcome. A blue-lit spectral face answers from the chapter O's unresolved edge, a reaction whose exact role is deliberately left open. The final close view preserves that uncertainty. The honor crisis has escalated, but the chapter does not show its accepted terms or winner. The chapter first lays out the honor duel as a system. A victory restores prestige, while defeat erases the loser's public honor. The rules are not private etiquette. They decide how a whole knighthood is allowed to remember the result. The losing side is treated as an example, with the corpse itself becoming part of the public punishment described by the source. That rule makes the approaching match more than a contest of skill. It threatens the name and remains of the person who loses. Such duels are said to be rare when the skill gap is obvious, which is why this challenge feels designed to expose someone. The danger settles over the camp before the fighters are even named. At the camp, Patel stands beside the young swordsman who has become entangled in his problem. The protagonist reads the difference between them immediately. His own wing's path is a swordrunner's movement, while Patel is a swordwalker. Patel's worn expression makes the mismatch crueler, because the older knight is already carrying an illness into the challenge. The protagonist understands that a normal exchange may not give Patel a fair chance, even before the week begins. Patel's ideal is introduced through memory. A knight should stand in front of fear and keep the danger away from his neighbors. The dream resembles the hero of a chivalric novel, a clean image of courage that Patel has tried to carry into real life. The image is not presented as vanity. It is the standard by which Patel has judged every choice he made. Even younger observers see why the ideal matters. Patel wanted to stay when everyone else had reason to flee. The dream closes on a fragile hope, not a promise that his damaged body can deliver it. The camp conversation tests Patel's ideal against a failing body, while his stubborn effort still carries the pride behind it. The protagonist sees the human cost beneath the legend and begins to treat Patel's wish as something worth protecting. That sympathy is exactly what the honor duel threatens to punish. The Yellow Elephant banner returns the story to the present, where the scheduled match is no longer an abstract rule. The camp waits under the deadline, with 1 week separating the promise of a duel from the body that must survive it. The opponent is named as Ron, a senior Yellow Elephant Knight, but the chapter does not supply a complete ranking or power chart. The date is fixed for 1 week later, turning Patel's illness into a literal countdown. Patel's body is already failing in the present, making the promise of the duel feel dangerous rather than dramatic. The source describes him as someone who may barely last a fortnight, a warning that remains source language rather than a medical diagnosis. The walking corpse image is held as a cruel prediction of what the duel may leave behind, not as an event that has happened. The schedule and the social pressure tighten together. Patel is expected to appear even though the body is already being counted against him. The stigma is not only about losing, it is about the accusation that stronger knights are using honor to oppress someone weak. Petal lowers his head under that judgment, still carrying the title and the responsibility that made him refuse to run. The history behind that refusal returns to the academy, where Patel was mocked for insisting on a stubborn kind of effort. The mockery did not erase him, it became the pressure that kept him training while other students measured him by easier standards. The record then counts 17 honor duel victories, turning his apparently foolish persistence into a documented history. When his lord's position was bombarded, Patel stood in the line of danger instead of retreating. At a gate, he defended the passage alone, his sword held between the settlement and 500 starving refugees. The gate defense is the clearest proof of that ideal. A knight becomes the barrier when no one else can stand there. That record is why Patel is remembered as the loyal, even though the current knighthood treats the same history as a stain. The present opponent's eye and armor return, contrasting Patel's history with the cold confidence of the side judging him. The pressure becomes another measured strike, a reminder that the coming duel is backed by people ready to enforce its result. The exchange remains a threat and a demonstration. The actual champion, winner, and survival outcome are still not shown. The threat is then stated plainly. If Petal loses, the body will be tied to a wagon and displayed through the village. The sword and hand imagery makes the threat feel physical, but it remains a declared plan rather than an execution. The chapter ends its explanation on that cruelty. Patel's future body is being discussed as property before the duel has even begun. The next lesson takes place in the forest, where the young swordsman keeps testing the path that opened inside him. Petal's worn sword is present as the object around which the next decision will turn. The protagonist works through a blue-edged movement, trying to understand whether a sword can carry more than its owner A's technique. The attempt leaves him facing the difference between seeing a route and being strong enough to walk it. Petal watches him closely, the older knight's beard and long hair making the contrast between their conditions unmistakable. The two blades meet in a measured exchange, not yet a formal duel, but a test of what the younger fighter can actually perceive. The protagonist names the secret. Sword devouring reveals an owner's skills and memories, then helps him form his own path. Petal hears an impossible claim, but the reaction is wary rather than dismissive. The forest holds the confession in silence while the proposed solution becomes more dangerous than a simple training exercise. The blade becomes the focus. This is not a promise to copy Petal, but a chance to read what the sword carried. A sharp sword movement punctuates the explanation, showing the ability as a dangerous active process rather than a harmless metaphor. Petal calls the claim absurd, yet the illustration of his face leaves room for the possibility that the young man is not lying. He tests the sword in his hand, shifting the conversation from impossible theory to the weapon that could decide the one-week match. Petal asks the protagonist to eat the sword, making the request a matter of trust, rather than an automatic transfer of power. The older knight's experience meets the younger man's ability. Fundamentals and a life of fighting may ground the new path. Liam measures the danger from the spectral side. Patel's level does not reach the later comparison point represented by Meekin. That gap does not make Patel worthless. It makes the remaining foundation more important. Experience, beliefs, and fundamentals are shown as the solid base created by Patel's life, even though the result is only a sliver of chance. Liam's white-haired, blue-lit form makes the lesson's source clear. This is the spectral mentor explaining compatibility, not Petal speaking through him. The chance is small, but it is better than sending a sick man into an opponent's prepared advantage. Liam reduces the choice to that gamble, a thin opening created by everything Patel has endured. The protagonist sits with the weight of that answer, no longer asking whether the idea is safe. The mentor's final look sends the decision back to the young swordsman. The protagonist offers to fight as Patel's champion, hoping victory can spare the older knight from bleeding for the accusation. He does not ask to borrow Patel's name. He offers to inherit the sword as burden and stand where Patel cannot. The request is direct. Entrust him with the sword that holds Patel's life and history. Patel's answer is not yet a legal consent or a completed handoff. It is the shock of hearing someone volunteer for his danger. The older knight weighs the kindness of the proposal against the rules that may not recognize it. The chapter's question hangs between them. Will the sword, the honor duel, and the young fighter's offer be accepted as one thing? Seolian and the others are asked to watch as the argument becomes a spar rather than a promise. Seolian questions whether Patel can really spar in his condition, keeping the illness visible instead of letting the champion idea erase it. Petal answers through posture as much as words. The sick man still has a sword hand and a choice to make. He insists that a spar can reveal the truth before anyone pretends the result is settled. Seolian draws first, turning the test into a real exchange with no promise of mercy. The tall composition holds the distance between the fighters while the observers remain part of the test. The protagonist recognizes that the offer cannot be proven by words alone. Liam watches beside Seolian, keeping the spectral lesson separate from the living spar. The mentor's blue eye fixes on the opening that only a precise exchange can reveal. The spar begins with distance and steel, the young fighter's new path meeting Seolian's immediate pressure. The protagonist searches for the line inside the movement, instead of relying only on strength. A fast impact interrupts the thought, proving that the lesson must survive contact with an opponent who will not wait. The spar becomes a sequence of committed cuts, with the protagonist says heavy sword meeting Seolian's speed and control. The weight of the young fighter's blade is visible in every collision. Seolian realizes that the strength in front of her is not being supplied by the healthy body she expected. Another exchange drives the point home. Patella's illness is irrelevant for this instant because his sword fundamentals are still real. The observers see the old knight's true skill surface beneath the damaged body. The chapter refuses the easy conclusion that sickness equals helplessness. The clash reaches a hard, bright impact, but it still does not give the champion offer a winner or legal answer. The next beat keeps both forces active, with the spar revealing ability rather than deciding ownership of the sword. Steel crosses again, and the lesson becomes a contest over timing, not a shortcut to inheritance. A close reaction catches the opening that might exist, while the source still withholds who has earned it. The spar spreads through the clearing, the younger fighter trying to answer Petalao's accumulated experience without pretending to possess it. Seoliana's face registers how much force the sick knight still carries. A late impact lands with enough force to make the whole test feel consequential. The protagonist remains upright and focused, but the panel does not show a completed victory or a settled transfer. The final clash cuts away at decision, carrying the spar, champion offer, and sword question into the next chapter unresolved. The day of the honor duel arrives under a gray sky, with yellow elephant knights gathered to witness the result. The gathered knights look toward the blonde fighter at the front of the field, expecting one body and seeing another. A gold-eyed close view catches the first confusion. The opponent is looking for Patel and finding a changed young swordsman instead. The replacement sequence widens the field, keeping the crowd, the challenger, and the blonde fighter in one continuous vertical space. The opposition studies the fighter's face and armor, trying to reconcile the body in front of them with the knight they expected. The visual contrast is deliberate. The blonde protagonist's younger frame and blue-lit presence do not match Petala's worn body. A gold-eyed reaction sharpens the question of who has been standing behind the promised duel. The surrounding knights see the same mismatch from a distance, turning one mistaken assumption into a public spectacle. The field's silence breaks around the name Patel, but the chapter keeps the confusion on the witnesses rather than solving every rumor. The protagonist's light eyes and blue-lit gaze mark him as Sir Vettel, even as the source calls him Young Master Arhan. One observer admits the mistake plainly. The kid in front of them is not Patel. The accusation says Patel was hiding behind the younger fighter, but the visuals do not confirm a broader conspiracy. The opposition recalls Patel as a sick dog from his youth, using contempt to explain why the replacement feels impossible. The protagonist does not resemble the bearded knight they came to defeat. His blonde hair, light eyes, and younger build are now unmistakable. The crowd demands to know why he is standing there and where Patel is. The answer is blunt. Patel will not be coming to the field. The opposition hears absence as another provocation, but the chapter still does not convert that reaction into an accepted legal ruling. The explanation turns inward to Petala's memory, where the older knight once believed the young master might overcome any trial. That hope was tied to the current Sir Patel, not to a promise that the young fighter had already inherited everything he carried. The remembered relationship gives the empty place on the duel field emotional weight. Petala's voice returns through a chivalric image, describing the young master as the kind of person who could stand where fear expected retreat. The ideal is contrasted with the lone path ahead. A knight may leave the field alone even when someone believes in him. The protagonist is framed against the dawn-colored distance, carrying the promise without being told that the promise has already succeeded. Petala's farewell is built from fear and gratitude together, not from a confirmed medical conclusion. He calls the young fighter his neighbor, the person whose presence kept the last stretch from feeling completely alone. Back on the field, the memory leaves Petala's absence hanging over the people who expected him to appear. The protagonist walks into the empty space prepared for Patel, making the substitution visible before anyone can call it legitimate. The source then cuts back to Petala's remembered face, preserving the emotional truth while leaving the legal truth unresolved. Petal remembers pretending not to fear the end, and the tear in his eye shows how thin that performance was. The two figures share the same sunset, one carrying a failing body, and the other being asked to keep living. Petal's smile is tired but deliberate. He wants the young master to leave the field alive. The protagonist's face tightens as the metaphor becomes a direct request to survive. Petal tells him to live, making the farewell an emotional instruction rather than proof that the later duel has already been settled. Petal describes his own end as twilight, while the young protagonist is placed beside him as the light that comes after. The metaphor is not a title card, it is Padela's final way of describing a life that is running out of day. A tear makes the farewell physical, showing grief without requiring the narration to declare a confirmed death. Padela's twilight ends in the image of a new dawn, a metaphor for succession rather than an on-screen absorption. Petal then raises the concrete object that can be passed on, the worn sword that carried his years of fighting. The blade looks clumsy and faded, but that appearance is part of why Petal asks the young fighter to take it seriously. The protagonist understands that accepting the sword means accepting a history, not claiming that the sword has already become his. The hands meet on the hilt. This is the visible handoff the chapter gives us, with no visual of sword devouring or absorption. They face each other once more, as Patel gives the young master the responsibility to carry the weapon forward. Patela's final wish is for luck in the battle, not a statement that the battle has already been won. His eye holds the last of the farewell, and the chapter lets the feeling remain more certain than the legal status. The memory closes on the two figures standing in the light, the sword transferred but its powers and consequences still unresolved. Back in the present, the protagonist cries openly as Patela's presence begins to fade from the field of memory. The farewell image names Patel as the kind neighbor who made the lonely road bearable. The narration describes him quietly fading into his own twilight, but the visual claim remains an apparent ending rather than a medical certificate. The protagonist looks back toward the field, carrying grief and the sword handoff into the confrontation that still waits. A nearby observer judges Patela's expression and says he seems to have breathed his last, which is the chapter's strongest but still observational statement. The opposing side answers with pity and contempt, treating the apparent end as proof that the honor duel belongs to them. Their law claim is explicit. They call the honor duel a victory because the law supposedly cares neither for life nor death. They demand Petela's corpse, turning the public punishment rule from an explanation into a present demand. A gold-lit movement accompanies the claim of ownership, but the source still shows an assertion rather than a completed transfer. The opponent Aw's armor and gold eyes make the institutional threat visible without supplying a full rank or legal hierarchy. The protagonist refuses to hand over what he has just been entrusted with. He answers that the honor duel is not over, rejecting the opponent's attempt to close the result through law alone. The next name finally enters the field, Meekin of the Yellow Elephant Knighthood. The protagonist identifies himself as Petela's champion, and the chapter cuts before Meekin's rank, terms, or result can be established. A crowded tavern becomes the first pressure test for a rigid young knight. The knight sits among older men, but his posture already rejects the room's easy mood. The brown-haired knight confirms the name Patel in the illustrated exchange, giving the local identity its first direct anchor. He objects to gambling and drinking because he believes a knight's conduct should protect the title. The older gathering treats that standard as a social nuisance rather than a virtue. His refusal to soften the argument leaves him isolated at the table. The scene makes the conflict cultural, formal dignity and informal fellowship pull apart. Petal's conviction is clear, even though the reason he became this rigid is not. The group pushes back with laughter and pressure, testing whether principle can survive embarrassment. He remains seated among them without pretending that vulgarity is harmless. The first chapter movement is not a duel but a fight to keep his own standard intact. By the end of the exchange, belonging still looks less valuable to him than conduct. The room finally turns its judgment on the knight, treating his convictions as a mood-killing defect. Then another young knight objects to the same drinking, singing, and gambling. The second protest gives Petal the first visible sign that his code is not entirely solitary. The gathering's mockery changes when the newcomer's convictions begin to resemble each other. What sounded inflexible in one man now looks admirable when the group can recognize a shared rule. The seniors praise the junior knight's firmness and invite him back into their circle. Petal is no longer the only person refusing to flatter the room. The social reward arrives as acceptance, but the chapter does not promise that the bond will last. A local swordrunner idea enters the conversation without receiving a complete hierarchy. The gathering has shifted from ridicule to approval, even though the unnamed knight's future remains absent. The replacement action sequence moves into repeated sword work, where effort becomes the visible language of conviction. A dark-haired swordsman keeps swinging while the surrounding imagery frames patience as a form of growth. Each repetition makes recognition look earned rather than granted by a single brilliant strike. The fighter is tested, but the sequence keeps his continued effort in view. The sword rises again, linking discipline to the wish to be seen for something real. The reflection turns from effort toward role, asking what a fighter can become when he cannot be the protagonist. A sword impact interrupts the thought, but the dark-haired fighter remains inside the work. The local reflection language explicitly calls the fighter a supporting figure, a self-concept rather than a canonical identity. A gauntleted hand reduces the idea of service to something physical and repeatable. The posture changes from solitary practice to action performed for other people. The story then gives Petal's strict code a person to protect. Daisy asks him to become her escort knight. Daisy's light-haired figure and Patel's armored presence establish the pair in the estate's warm setting. He accepts the duty without bargaining for recognition or a higher title. Daisy answers that steadiness with trust, describing a knight who never betrays the people beside him. Her confidence turns Patel's abstract ethics into a promise that can be tested in public. The escort role places him beside Daisy in the territory where her reputation matters. The local art presents their relationship as protective and personal, without supplying the appointment's legal terms. Daisy addresses the armored knight as Patel the Loyal, tying his public identity to her trust. Daisy sees value in the same inflexibility that the tavern treated as a flaw. Petal stands beside Daisy in the escort arrangement, the pair framed as protector and protected noblewoman. The story then gives Petal's strict code a person to protect. Daisy asks him to become her escort knight. Daisy's friendly presence fills the territory scene, while Petal remains the quiet escort behind her popularity. Travel and public company make the escort arrangement look easy while the pair still have status around them. The crowd's attention belongs to Daisy, but Petal's role is to make her safety feel ordinary. The palette then darkens, and the montage begins to show a different social position. Laughter and pressure replace the earlier warmth as the noble environment turns hostile. Petal's silhouette carries the change without revealing the single event that caused it. Daisy's popularity has not protected her from the fall that the montage now implies. Petal's loyalty becomes more important precisely because public approval is no longer reliable. A darkened figure and a fading self-description suggest humiliation, not a fully explained history. The local reflection says he cannot become the protagonist, but it does not erase his duty to shield her. The Crossell family's decline remains a visible condition rather than a solved plot point. Petal's role survives in the chapter as a promise that outlasts the status around it. The warm escort memory and the later pressure are deliberately placed against each other. What changed is clear in the images, who caused it and when remain outside this lock. The closing montage returns to Daisy in clean portraits before the local story shows her distress. A clean portrait holds Daisy's light-haired identity before the montage turns toward distress. The images move from remembered warmth toward a harder room and a less protected life. A distressed woman appears in the sequence, but the local evidence does not merge her identity with Daisy. The brown-haired armored man is finally named in the art as Padel the Loyal. A distinct distressed woman appears in the later sequence. This local panel does not identify her as Daisy. The close armored face repeats the local name Patel the Loyal, without merging him with any earlier global identity. The closing hand and armor image carries Petal's protective resolve into the words that Daisy needs him. The final declaration makes her need the immediate reason he keeps standing. The chapter cuts before the rescue, the threat, or the time of this declaration is settled. The chapter opens inside a live sword conflict, with both fighters already committed to the exchange. Steel faces steel before the scene supplies a safe summary of how the duel reached this point. A replacement sequence first records recognition, then shifts toward the official who is watching the duel. The fighter's sword is compared with Padel's, turning the weapon into a memorial clue. Ron Tire names himself the Yellow Elephant Adjutant and claims the overseer role for this honored duel. The winged opponent threatens to take Patel's corpse and injure the fighter who stands in the way. The threat turns the duel from a contest into a fight over what will happen to the dead. Ron Tire staging forces both combatants to step back and create formal distance. 10 paces separate the fighters, replacing an immediate ambush with a declared opening condition. The official start keeps the spectacle regulated, even though the full rules remain outside the frame. Ron Tire's local procedure places the two duelists 10 paces apart before the declared start. The duel is now formally visible, but formal procedure still does not guarantee a fair outcome. The white-haired swordsman walks, swings, and studies the weapon instead of chasing a named technique. His repeated sword work asks what value Patel's blade carries beneath its ordinary appearance. The white-haired swordsman studies Patel's unyielding sword as a principle rather than a trick. The fighter searches for an unyielding quality, basics, faithfulness, and no reliance on deceit. The local comparison separates the needle, the fang, and the unyielding sword without defining a full taxonomy. His method is analysis under pressure, because copying movement would not answer the opponent's realm advantage. The sword study becomes a question of whether conviction can provide a foundation for survival. The opponent's plan becomes darker when the bound corpse is shown as material for a second set of wings. The bound body is shown as Petal's corpse stakes image, while the opponent's intended sacrifice remains only a plan. The corpse is presented as the object of an intended sacrifice, not as a resolved ritual. The white-haired fighter chooses to accept Patel's convictions rather than let the dead become a resource. That choice is moral and technical at once. Carry the burden, then make the blade steadier. The white-haired fighter accepts Patel's whole burden and seeks to become steadier steel, not merely faster. An older sword expert recognizes the rookie's stance and asks whether Patel's influence is visible in it. The winged opponent launches with the confidence of someone who expects realm superiority to decide the exchange. The swords collide, and the first contact challenges the assumption that the rookie cannot answer. The older commentator reads the stance as evidence of Patel's principle rather than a simple imitation. The duel accelerates through repeated lunges, impacts, energy trails, and hard reactions. The winged fighter increases pressure while the white-haired defender leans on a sturdy blade and Patel's principles. Blocked and redirected strikes keep the exchange alive without naming a winner. The derived panels must be read at the source panel slot, not sorted by their later numeric labels. Each collision preserves the same unresolved question: can the rookie survive long enough to reach the opponent's realm? The corpse remains a stake beside the combat, never a completed sacrifice. The chapter hands the continuing duel to the next cut without confirming its outcome. The final impacts show escalation, not legal resolution or sword absorption. Petal's legacy is active in the fighter's stance, but the transfer mechanism remains unseen. A high-energy derived clash keeps both combatants visible while the duel remains unresolved. The opponent has been forced to take the rookie seriously, but seriousness is not defeat. A bright clash closes the chapter at the edge of a larger exchange. No accepted panel supplies a victor, surrender, or completed use of Patel's remains. The duel is still moving when the local evidence ends. The duel accelerates through repeated lunges, impacts, energy trails, and hard reactions. The live honor duel continues with the white-haired fighter facing a much faster opponent. Both swords are already committed, so the opening carries pressure forward instead of resetting the scene. A long action sequence tests the defender through blocks, impacts, and a forced low position. The sturdy sword keeps returning to the frame even as the opponent tries to break the defender's posture. Foundation and tower imagery make endurance feel like a base that must survive repeated force. The older expert's explanation turns the resistance into more than a lucky stop. The fighter remains armed through the kneeling aftermath, with no defeat shown. The opponent's anger grows because the defender's look refuses to match the supposed realm gap. The combat has become a contest over whether fundamentals can keep a body in motion. The opponent answers with contempt, rejecting any simple explanation for the power difference. The replacement sequence turns speed into a blur of entries, impacts, and changing angles. The winged fighter attacks repeatedly while the defender tries to keep a stable guard. The local memory turns the duel into a fight to never lose Daisy's honor, while leaving its exact time relation unresolved. Each strike asks the defender to read movement instead of chasing the body that produced it. The white-haired fighter changes tactics, hold distance, distrust every movement, and match the battle's breathing. Observation replaces panic as the defender measures when to move rather than rushing into the speed gap. The sword hand stays ready while the fighter watches the opponent's rhythm. Distance becomes a controllable variable instead of an empty space between attacks. Breath and flow give the defender a repeatable method against a realm that cannot be outrun. The defender's local method is distance, suspicious observation, breath matching, and control of the flow. The sequence creates a small opening without pretending the winged state has been solved. Golden motion slips through the defender's guard and exposes the opponent's speed advantage. A rear angle strike arrives before the defender can fully turn toward it. Ghost-like traces make the opponent's body difficult to track through the exchange. The defender's startled reaction shows that the method has not yet closed the blind angle. A bloody close-up turns speed from spectacle into an immediate survival problem. The winged fighter can choose the angle of attack while the defender is still learning the pattern. The next method must interrupt the wings before another clean hit lands. The winged opponent descends in a strong illustrated attack, making the speed threat immediately readable. The opponent attacks from above while the older expert frames the movement as beyond ordinary perception. The term ghosts of the battlefield gives the after images a local name without completing the hierarchy. The older expert's illustrated explanation ties the wings to ghost-like movement beyond human perception. The only useful question is no longer how to race the wings, but how to break their condition. The derived frame makes the sword runner look like a battlefield ghost, with motion outrunning ordinary sight. The winged fighter's motion remains ghost-like, while the old expert's reaction keeps the hierarchy visible. The defender is treated as a foolish descendant only in the local exchange, not as a global identity claim. Complacency would erase the small advantage created by distance and breath. The chapter makes the wings a realm-level movement advantage rather than a decorative aura. The opponent's sturdy sword comment leads to the explicit tactical objective: break those wings. The sturdy sword preserves the defender's body, but durability alone cannot close the speed gap. The opponent keeps attacking while acknowledging that the blade is harder to dismiss than expected. The defender searches the moving space for the structure that makes the wings possible. The duel narrows to one problem: Survive long enough to damage or interrupt that state. The winged opponent stands over the confrontation while the surrounding officials call the duel unwinnable. Surrender is presented as practical advice, especially before the local vice captain changes his mind. The corpse demand turns institutional pressure into a second weapon against the defender. The fighter does not visibly concede, and the scene shifts toward the reason he continues. A local memory explains why Daisy matters. She is one of the few people Patel believes he still has. Daisy pleads with the armored knight not to leave, giving the duel a face beyond the realm comparison. The party scene shows a fallen noble being humiliated, while the protective promise takes shape around her. Petal answers with a visible hand and arm or reassurance rather than a speech about his own glory. The memory makes protection, not victory, the emotional reason the duel cannot simply be abandoned. Daisy's dignity becomes the stake that gives Petal's rigid code a human target. The exact date and place of this memory remain deliberately unassigned. The other escort swordsmen stay unnamed, leaving the local promise centered on Patel and Daisy. Petal's declaration becomes direct. He carries Daisy's honor and challenges the stronger fighter. The armored knight frames honor as worth more than a life that can be preserved through surrender. The challenge is not presented as confidence that he will win by force. The local declaration identifies Petal the Loyal as Daisy Crossel's Knight of the Crossel County. Petal's identity and honor vow become a direct challenge, but the duel's outcome remains outside the panel. Spectators watch as the source returns to the honor duel frame. The contest is identified as an honor duel, but no accepted panel supplies its result. The winged opponent turns the continuing duel into an execution attempt, pressing the defender with golden attacks. Impact follows impact as the opponent tries to crush both the body and the conviction behind the sword. The defender remains inside the pressure instead of retreating, even though the opening injury state is not reconstructed. The opponent's confidence sharpens into anger when the defender does not break on schedule. The white-haired fighter answers that the pressure is exactly what he needed to see. The clash remains a live exchange, not evidence of a completed kill or a new power. Every golden entry carries the same unresolved stakes: body, conviction, and Daisy's honor. The fighter survives the sequence long enough for the opponent's timing to become readable. The chapter advances through escalation while keeping the missing CH-35 handoff visible as a seam. The opponent's rage is growing, but rage has not yet become victory. The opponent's threat turns the live duel into psychological pressure against the defender's body and convictions. The live duel narrows toward a change that the local panels do not yet name. The winged opponent turns the continuing duel into an execution attempt, pressing the defender with golden attacks. The white-haired defender accepts the opponent's pressure inside the clash, treating it as information rather than surrender. The defender remains inside the pressure instead of retreating, even though the opening injury state is not reconstructed. The opponent's confidence sharpens into anger when the defender does not break on schedule. The white-haired fighter answers that the pressure is exactly what he needed to see. The clash remains a live exchange, not evidence of a completed kill or a new power. Every golden entry carries the same unresolved stakes: body, conviction, and Daisy's honor. A derived sequence shows the opponent attacking the defender's posture and identity as much as his guard. Angry eyes and repeated impacts make the pressure personal without supplying a canonical opponent name. The defender is knocked low, but the sturdy sword keeps returning to the frame. The old expert's presence turns the resistance into something that can be interpreted, not dismissed as luck. The opponent's taunts grow sharper because the defender's look still refuses to surrender. The body is forced down while the conviction behind it remains upright. The realm gap is visible, but the exchange proves it is not an automatic ending. The defender survives through endurance while the exact technique remains unnamed. The sequence leaves the opponent more frustrated than before the first entry. The duel's pressure now tests whether a sturdy foundation can outlast a superior movement state. The fighter remains armed after the low point, preserving the next decision. No frame in this sequence settles the corpse, the duel, or the wing state. A close-up captures the white-haired fighter's surprise as the pressure shifts. The defender's motive is stated through action and memory. This fight was never about winning, but about never losing Daisy. Clashes return beside determined eyes, linking the physical line to the person whose honor it protects. The two armored fighters meet in a clear sword clash, but the impact does not establish a winner. The defender does not need a favorable power chart if surrender would abandon Daisy's dignity. The memory makes persistence a choice while leaving any new ability unconfirmed. The illustrated resolve makes the duel a fight for Daisy's sake and a refusal to lose her honor. The local resolve is emotional and tactical at once, but it is not a victory announcement. The duel returns to feet, ground, and blades as the defender keeps contesting space. A bright impact shows the sturdy sword meeting the winged attack without a decisive advantage. Ground contact becomes the counterpoint to the opponent's gliding movement. Another action sequence records the opponent's anger while the old expert refuses to call the defender's survival a fluke. A close insult is followed by another strike, keeping contempt and force in the same motion. The expert's explanation reclassifies the exchange as a real swordrunner versus walker contest. The opponent's absolute superiority looks less certain, even though the physical gap remains dangerous. The older expert's explanation calls the defender's survival more than a mere fluke. The local term walker describes the defender's side of the contrast without resolving a complete hierarchy. The opponent grows openly furious and insists that a sturdy sword does not justify looking down on the winged state. The chosen one rhetoric belongs to the opponent's local pride, not to a confirmed global title. A battered defender remains present, while the opponent's measured control gives way to ego-driven punishment. The more personal the attack becomes, the more visible the possibility of a mistake becomes. The opponent launches the final visible escalation with airborne impact and repeated golden strikes. The defender renews the vow that Daisy's honor cannot be surrendered, even as the sword rises again. A golden descent compresses the realm gap into one last collision course. The airborne opponent's rage drives the next escalation, but the wings are not shown broken. The raised sword meets the oncoming force in a bright action cliffhanger. Golden energy bears down, as the defender carries Daisy's honor into the next exchange. The chapter ends at the collision, with holding death, rescue, and victor. The final action is a handoff to the next chapter, not a resolved result. The defender's vow survives to the cut even though the body may not be safe. The bright final collision ends the chapter unresolved, without showing who controls the result. The white-haired fighter's surprised close-up asks what changed, leaving the phenomenon unnamed. The memory opens with a young dark-haired fighter standing over the aftermath of his first honor duel victory. He had won, but the real story began when a noblewoman came running through the city, carrying grief no aristocratic title could hide. Society had already reduced her to a fallen noble, and that contempt drew his attention toward the duty she would soon share with him. When another man threatened her honor, the fighter did not answer with quiet diplomacy. He marks this as his first honor duel, issuing a challenge while Patel's name remains tied to the memory of the fallen noblewoman. After the challenge, a rider carried the demand to the noble residence. The household received him with the nervous silence of people who knew a duel had a price. He was not asking for vague regret, he wanted the offending side to kneel and beg forgiveness. The farewell makes the name Patel visible, but the chapter never proves that this named knight and the blue-eyed fighter are the same person. She insists her family's contract with him ended long ago, leaving him free to become the kind of knight others respect. He rejects that future, as if his sword and the role attached to it have already consumed every softer choice. Her plea is not about a battle anymore. She is trying to stop him from turning loyalty into self-destruction. The memory answers with survival. They lived through the disaster, but it does not explain how the sword legacy will continue. Then the private honor dispute widens into the war of succession among the princes of the Iron Kingdom. Cities burn, the battlefield fills with smoke, and the woman's father and brothers are swallowed by the conflict. Her mother is taken prisoner and dies by her own hand, leaving the daughter as the family's last visible survivor. The surviving noblewoman is pushed into armor and conscription before she has time to understand the inheritance placed on her shoulders. At the front, fear finally breaks through her composure, and she calls for Patel to run while he still can. He answers with command instead of panic, ordering her to regain control while the battle closes around them. The vow is explicit. Patel the Loyal will protect her without fail. His promise is not a heroic pose. It is a decision to remain beside the last survivor when every safe route is disappearing. Flaming arrows cover the sky, turning the war into a ceiling of fire. Mage bombardment follows without pause, and the battlefield becomes a place where distance offers no real safety. The fighter places his body and sword between the noblewoman and the attacks, insisting that the role he chose will not change. Cavalry and magic keep pressing from different directions, but he keeps her inside the path he can defend. The protection works as movement: interpose, cut, advance, and never leave the protected person exposed. He cuts down one attacker. Then he cuts down another, turning repeated close-range strikes into a corridor through the melee. The woman is pulled deeper into the battle, and the fighter answers by tightening the space around her rather than retreating. By the end of the sequence, loyalty is no longer a line, he says. It is the tactic that keeps both of them alive. After the war, the woman's achievements are recognized in a formal court. She receives a countess's title and a territory, but the solemn close-up makes the grant feel like responsibility, not a reward. The new territory is already starving, and the first thing waiting for its countess is not celebration, but a crowd with torches. Years of war have left homes damaged and families missing, so the people's anger has a cause larger than one speech. She stands inside that anger and accepts that governing the territory means facing the pain it inherited. The memory refuses an easy solution. The people are not villains, and the countess is not shown solving the famine. She simply bears the fury herself, while the old protection thread remains tied to the sword and the people around her. That burden turns the earlier promise into something political. Honor must survive after the battlefield too. Before the chapter can settle what she becomes, the story cuts back to the live duel. Blue force tears across the rocky ground as the unnamed fighter meets the blonde armored opponent again. The impact carries the same realm gap pressure from the previous chapter, but the blue-eyed fighter is still inside the exchange. The opponent staggers through the blast, wounded and confused by a response a novice should not be able to produce. Blood gathers at his mouth as he tries to explain the phenomenon, instead of accepting the fighter's endurance. The duel is not over, and the visible injury is not permission to call either side defeated. The opponent calls the display mana shock, a phenomenon he says belongs to clashes between overwhelming powers. He claims the fighter would need absolute mana mastery to create it, but that explanation is his theory, not a confirmed fact. The accusation hardens when the fighter offers no confession and the blue aura keeps answering through the sword. The blonde knight reaches for a political explanation, alleging a deal with a witch of the Sky Empire and a stolen magic tool. Nothing in the chapter verifies that story. It only shows how badly the opponent needs the impossible display to be someone else's fraud. He calls sorcery cowardice and says the fighter's wings were too good for him, dragging the duel back to terms he controls. The blue-eyed fighter rises into the accusation instead of answering it with words. The opponent promises to lower himself to the fighter's level, turning contempt into a fresh test of knightly pride. The fighter's hand tightens around the sword inside the blue aura, and the thought underneath the duel finally surfaces. He admits that no swordsman has clung so miserably to the walker path or to an inferiority he never learned to escape. That confession is not surrender. It is the reason he keeps standing when talent and realm both say he should fall. He ends on a vow rather than a victory. He will not be defeated, and the result passes directly into the next chapter. The honor duel resumes without a reset, with both swords already moving through the rocky ground. Blue energy cuts across the space while the blonde armored opponent braces and answers with a counter. The impact is hard enough to force the stronger fighter to absorb it instead of dismissing the younger swordsman. The young fighter keeps his cyan eyes on the line of attack and turns another sword trajectory into a counter. Neither fighter gives the scene a winner. Every answer creates another opening that can still be reversed. The opponent is forced to acknowledge that the younger fighter has not broken under the pressure. The duel stays active, so Chi H37's refusal to yield becomes the immediate condition of this chapter rather than a finished promise. The blonde opponent demands to know why the young fighter will not use that hidden power. The question lands over the blade, but the answer is another blue-edged attack instead of a confession. The opponent presses harder because the suspected trump card still has not appeared. The young fighter chooses pressure and concealment, keeping the sword moving without explaining what the opponent thinks he possesses. Then the opponent realizes the young fighter endured a wound that should have made standing impossible. The blood and damaged posture are visible, but the sword is still held on line. The blonde opponent studies that endurance and asks why anyone would hold out against such a difference in realm and skill. Despite the wound and the realm gap, the fighter is still standing. He refuses to let either decide his honor. The young fighter rejects the idea that he is fighting for wealth, status, or any material prize. His reason is the path of the sword and honor inherited from an older swordsman. A younger boy faces that older teacher and speaks about carrying the path on, but the mentor's name is never supplied. The duel surges again, and the opponent reacts to the shape of the young fighter's sword rather than only to the strike. A blue-edged trajectory drives through the clash and forces the opponent to ask what kind of sword he is seeing. The opponent's disbelief turns toward a washed-up figure from memory, but the reference is not identified here. The sword answers with another blue strike, making the weapon a possible legacy clue without turning it into a name. The stronger fighter is wounded, yet the higher realm and the ability to reverse the exchange remain visible. The chapter keeps the identity reference open instead of deciding who the old sword or its former owner belongs to. An unnamed armored voice begins analyzing the young fighter's age, wound, and sword trajectories. The voice treats the endurance as astonishing rather than ordinary swordwalker technique. The young fighter is already a swordwalker at this age, yet the speaker still describes the output as pure and solid. The speaker remains unmerged with the opponent because the panel sequence gives analysis but no secure face-to-voice assignment. That outside recognition makes the fighter's survival more remarkable, but it does not close the realm gap. The evidence is about talent and trajectory, not a new name, mentor, or confirmed ability. The opponent realizes the young fighter is not refusing to use superhumanization. He may simply be unable to use it. The taunt turns the fighter's endurance into proof of a limit the opponent believes will decide the duel. Superhumanization becomes the named measure of the gap, but its mechanics and the reason for the supposed limit stay open. The young fighter keeps moving before the stronger swordsman can turn that diagnosis into a clean finish. The chapter records the opponent's claim, not an objective rule that the young fighter can never cross. The opponent says there is nothing left to hold back and drives another full-force attack at the wounded fighter. The young fighter meets the pressure with the same stubborn sword line that has kept him alive so far. Both bodies are visibly strained, and the opponent's confidence now carries urgency instead of effortless control. Another clean hit could decide the fight, especially for the fighter already carrying the wound. The opponent's narration recalls a boy with an unbelievably steadfast heart, a boy who would not yield before an unfathomable wall. The comparison reframes the young fighter's refusal as a known pattern of will, rather than simple recklessness. The stronger fighter still orders the boy to give up and die, treating the higher realm as an uncrossable wall. The younger fighter answers the order through movement, not surrender. The opponent's contempt has become an unwilling recognition of the trait defining this duel. The opponent orders the boy to die while the inherited sword and honor path keeps turning refusal into action. The narration says the boy may carry on another swordsman's blade, but neither speaker nor boy receives a proper name here. That line prepares the closing Patel reference without proving that the young fighter is Patel or that the mentor is the same person. The legacy is carried through continued sword use and refusal to yield, not through a newly named technique. The surviving question is simple and dangerous. Can the sword's path continue through this wounded body? Blue aura begins to concentrate as the young fighter decides this is a fight he must not lose, even if he dies trying. The charge is no longer only endurance, it is conviction converted into a final sword response. He says he cannot lose this fight even if the price is his life. The panel names superhumanization at the blue energy climax, visibly invoking the power the opponent said he could not use. The two fighters trade a final burst of blows after the activation, with blue slashes crossing at close range. The younger fighter is thrown or forced down, but the panel sequence still refuses to identify the victor. Blood marks the blonde armor, proving injury but not final defeat. A close question hangs over the shock. Did the other fighter see what happened? The next recognition line is held back, so the chapter does not convert the exchange into a winner announcement. The confirmed change is only that the duel has reached a new state, leaving identities and result for the next chapter. The closing illustrated panel names the weapon as Sir Patel's sword, turning the legacy object into the final clue. The chapter opens after the decisive exchange, with a young swordsman standing over a wounded armored loser. The defeated officer is still alive, and the victor's first confirmed choice is restraint rather than another strike. The loser curses the little champion, showing that the result has not become acceptance. The visual aftermath keeps the victor unnamed, but it makes the honor duel result clear enough to begin the price procedure. When the guards ask what to do with the wounded man, the victor permits them to move him. The young champion allows the defeated vice-captain to be taken to the infirmary, preserving his life before naming any price. The officials thank him for that consideration, and the open ground gives way to an encampment where the rules can be explained. An officer explains that an honor duel victor may demand one of three things from the defeated side. The victor is addressed as young master, but the story still withholds the personal name that would connect him to Patel's legacy. The first price is confiscation. Wealth and possessions can be taken from the defeated side. The second destroys the loser's honor and turns that person into a slave. The third price is called a flag, an older honor demand that does not behave like a private trophy. The young victor says he already knows that third option, cutting in before the explanation is finished. He wants the flag as his price, choosing honor over wealth and refusing to turn the defeated man into property. The official accepts the intent, but explains that he cannot settle the flag alone. The main force must answer. That turns a private victory into a public obligation, because the defeated group must decide how to honor the claim. The victor leaves the damaged ground with his bloodied sword, carrying the honor decision beyond the duel itself. The road and warm sky shift the episode from public procedure toward a private inheritance. The sword remains the visual bridge. The champion carries it forward even while the name behind it stays unresolved. The next memory brings the weapon and its history into the same frame as a younger swordsman. The young swordsman tells his master that he wants to give the sword a name. The master answers that Patel's sword was not grand enough to deserve a name, but the boy refuses that judgment. What matters to him is the trace of Patel's weary life and the only legacy that life left behind. The older master calls the idea fine and asks what name the boy has in mind. The chapter withholds that proper sword name, so the flag's meaning remains tied to legacy rather than a completed naming payoff. Back at camp, the defeated vice-captain erupts and insists that the duel was still his victory. He demands the Patel relic and the champion brat, treating the flag as something he can seize after the fact. The attendants warn that moving will worsen his wounds, but he orders them to be silent. His threat is physical. He wants the champion's limbs cut off and the honor price reversed by force. The defeated side has not accepted the flag, and its first response is retaliation rather than reconciliation. That rage targets both the unnamed young victor and Patel's legacy, but the chapter still does not show what happens next. A senior officer says the realm gap cost both arms, and the boy asked for the flag after sparing the vice captain. He calls the boy the one who broke the vice captain's wings, but the victor's personal name remains absent. The question is why anyone would choose something so useless in the present day. The answer is conviction as solid as steel. The flag is meaningful precisely because it refuses ordinary profit. The bearded captain laughs at an age where everyone chases profit and praises a swordsman who still carries conviction and chivalry. He explains that assembling a force so quickly would have been difficult without a special guest. The senior officer is named Martin the Steel, captain of the Yellow Elephant Knighthood. His special guest is connected to Patel, the unusually significant knight whose honor has drawn this response. The defeated side is shocked that the knight it insulted is no ordinary man, even though the full petal relationship remains open. Troops form up as the White family's watchers arrive, turning the price dispute into a factional confrontation. The wounded officer is identified as Meekin, vice captain of the Yellow Elephant, while Martin remains the separate captain. The dialogue describes the Watchers as protectors of the Iron Kingdom and the White family as one of the great houses steering the continent. That ceremony matters because the flag now carries the honor of a group, not only the wounded man who lost the duel. The defeated side is warned that the White family's mistress has come to see them. The defeated side reacts as the White family connection is revealed, realizing that the mistress is involved in this confrontation. She identifies herself as Daisy White, mistress of the White family. Daisy says the man who challenged Patel, disturbed his rest, and tried to defile his honor will pay the price. Daisy White identifies herself as the mistress and declares that the target will pay the price. Execution and outcome remain for the next handoff. Alright everyone, that's it for today. See you next time.